I am Kiara, 32 years old, and a forensic accountant who thought I knew how to track every lie a person could tell. 5 days after giving birth, I unlocked the front door of my beautiful Atlanta home, my C-section scar burning with every step, expecting to find my husband waiting for us. Instead, I found stripped hardwood floors and echoing walls. Everything was gone. A strange couple walked through the front door carrying paint swatches, demanding to know why I was trespassing. When they showed me the deed with my perfectly forged signature, I realized my husband had taken everything and erased me from my own life. I used my last few dollars at a bus station to help a stranded old man, unaware that 2 weeks later, a sleek black limousine would pull up to my toxic mother's house and the driver would hand me the keys to an absolute empire. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build your own justice when the people who were supposed to protect you left you with nothing. The sharp winter wind of Atlanta whipped across my face as I stood frozen in the foyer of what was supposed to be my safe haven. My 5-day-old son Julian whimpered against my chest, seeking warmth. I clutched him tighter, trying to shield his fragile body from the draft. The physical agony radiating from my abdomen was blinding. The doctors had specifically told me not to lift anything heavier than my baby, not to walk upstairs, and to rest. But rest was a luxury I clearly could no longer afford. I blinked, staring into the cavernous, empty space of my living room, hoping my exhausted brain was simply hallucinating. But the emptiness was absolute. The plush velvet sectional we had picked out together was gone. The antique mahogany dining table where we had hosted Sunday dinners was gone. Even the custom nursery I had spent 8 months decorating, painting the walls, a soft sage green, and assembling the crib with my own hands, had been completely hollowed out. Not a single baby blanket, not a single picture frame remained. The silence in the house was deafening, broken only by Julian's soft cries and the ragged sound of my own breathing. Jamal had not come to the hospital to pick us up. He had texted me that morning saying he was stuck at his accounting firm dealing with an emergency audit and that he had ordered a premium rideshare to bring me and Julian home safely. I had believed him. After 4 years of marriage, I had trusted the man who stood beside me at the altar and promised to protect our family. I had trusted him when he said he was handling the finances while I was on maternity leave. I had trusted him right up until the moment my rideshare pulled away, leaving me on the porch of an empty shell. My mind, a trained forensic accounting machine, automatically tried to calculate the logistics. How does a man pack up a 4-bedroom house in 5 days without drawing attention? How does he empty a life so thoroughly? I reached into my diaper bag with a trembling hand, pulling out my phone to call him. The automated voice informed me that the number had been disconnected. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. This was not a robbery. A burglar does not take the curtains and the baby bottles. This was an erasure. Before I could even process the magnitude of the betrayal, the sound of a key turning in the front door lock made my heart jump into my throat. The heavy wooden door swung open, revealing a young couple bundled in winter coats, laughing and holding a stack of color swatches. They stepped into the foyer, shaking off the cold, and then they saw me. The woman gasped, dropping her coffee cup onto the bare floor. The man instantly stepped in front of her, his posture defensive. "Who are you and how did you get in here?" he demanded, his voice echoing loudly in the empty house. I pulled Julian closer to my chest, taking a painful step backward. My mind was reeling. "I should be asking you that question," I managed to say, my voice shaking. "This is my house. I live here. I just got back from the hospital." The man pulled a phone from his pocket, his fingers hovering over the screen. "Look, lady, I do not know what kind of scam you are running or if you are confused, but we just closed on this property 3 days ago. You are trespassing. You need to leave right now before I call the police." The word closed hit me like a physical blow. Closed. You cannot close on a house without the consent of both owners. My name was on the deed. I put down the entire down payment using the bonuses I had saved from my forensic accounting firm. Jamal had terrible credit when we met. I built our financial foundation. "You are lying," I said, the shock slowly giving way to panic. "This property belongs to Kiara and Jamal. I am Kiara. I did not sell my house. I was in a hospital bed recovering from major surgery. The woman peeked out from behind her husband, her expression a mix of fear and pity. She reached into her oversized tote bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. "We closed on Tuesday," she said softly. The seller said his wife was already relocating to Florida for a new job. He gave us the keys this morning. She slowly handed me a stack of stapled papers. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold them. I flipped past the title insurance and the inspection reports, stopping dead at the final closing document. The deed transfer. I stared at the bottom of the page. There, on the signature line right next to Jamal's messy scrawl, was my name. Kiara. The signature was flawless. The loops, the slant, the exact pressure of the pen. It was a perfect, undeniable forgery. Bile rose in my throat. I am a forensic accountant. I spend my days analyzing fraudulent signatures, hidden assets, and corporate embezzlement. And yet, I had been completely blind to the monster sleeping in my own bed. Jamal had not just packed up our belongings. He had liquidated our biggest asset right under my nose, while I was literally cut open on an operating table bringing his son into the world. He had forged my signature, sold the house for cash, and vanished into thin air. "You need to leave the man," said, his tone hardening as he saw the blood drain from my face. "I do not want to call the cops on a woman with a newborn baby, but we legally own this property. If you have an issue with your husband, you need to take it up with him." I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. I looked down at Julian, who was beginning to wail, his tiny fists waving in the cold air. The reality of my situation crashed down on me with terrifying clarity. I had no house. Jamal had my car, which he said he was taking to get detailed before the baby came home. I opened my banking app on my phone, praying for a miracle. My checking account balance loaded on the screen. $0.00. My savings account. 0. The joint emergency fund we had spent 3 years building. Emptied. He had taken everything. The new owner took a step toward me, pointing toward the open front door. "I am giving you 1 minute to step off this property," he warned. I did not argue. I could not argue. The legal battle to prove the forgery would take months, maybe years. Right now, in this freezing foyer with my baby shivering in my arms, I had no leverage and no resources. I clutched the diaper bag to my shoulder, feeling the sharp, agonizing pull of my stitches, and slowly backed out the door. The heavy oak door slammed shut in my face, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet suburban neighborhood. I heard the deadbolt slide into place, locking me out of the life I had worked so hard to build. I stood on the concrete porch, the winter wind cutting through my thin hospital discharge clothes. I looked down the street at the manicured lawns and the expensive cars sitting in driveways. My neighbors, people I had hosted for summer barbecues and holiday parties, were inside their warm homes, completely unaware that I was standing outside with nothing but the clothes on my back and a newborn in my arms. A sharp pain ripped through my abdomen, forcing me to bend slightly. I needed to sit down. I needed pain medication. Julian needed to be fed. I pulled my coat tighter around the baby, trying to share my body heat. "Think, Kiara," I whispered to myself, fighting back the tears that threatened to blind me. "You are a problem solver. Think." But there was no immediate solution. My phone battery was at 12%. My bank accounts were drained. My husband had erased me. I began to walk down the driveway, every step sending shooting pain through my healing body. I did not know where I was going, but I knew I could not stay here. I had to survive this. I had to keep my son alive. And deep in the frozen corners of my shattered heart, a new emotion began to take root. It was not sorrow. It was not grief. It was pure, calculating rage. Jamal thought he could leave me for dead. He thought because he took the money and the house that he had won. But he forgot one crucial detail. He forgot what I do for a living. I track liars. And I was going to track him to the ends of the earth. I stood on the welcome mat of the home I had paid for, locked out in the biting January wind. The heavy oak door had slammed shut, leaving me with nothing but the clothes on my back and the terrifying reality of my situation. Julian let out a sharp cry, a sound that pierced right through my chest and snapped me out of my paralyzing shock. I had to move. I stumbled down the porch steps, my legs feeling like heavy blocks of ice. As I passed the brick mailbox at the end of the driveway, something caught my eye. The little red metal flag was raised. I pulled open the metal door, expecting to find junk mail or a final utility bill. There was no mail inside, just a single yellow sticky note pressed flat against the cold metal bottom. I reached in and peeled it off. The handwriting was unmistakably Jamal's. The messy slanted letters I had seen on 100 grocery lists now spelled out my absolute destruction. Do not try to look for us. The equity is mine. Us. The word hit me harder than the freezing wind whipping across my face. He did not just leave alone. My mind raced, flipping through the last 6 months of our marriage like a ledger searching for the hidden discrepancy. The late nights he claimed to be working with his brother Terrence at his construction company. The hushed phone calls he immediately blamed on demanding clients. The way Terrence's wife Brittany would always find an excuse to corner Jamal at family barbecues, her hand lingering on his forearm just a second too long. Brittany. The puzzle pieces snapped into place with sickening clarity. During Thanksgiving, Brittany had complained loudly about Terrence not making enough money to support the luxury lifestyle she felt she deserved. Jamal had defended her, taking her side over his own brother. I had brushed it off as sibling rivalry, but it was not. Jamal had drained my bank accounts, forged my signature, and stolen the equity of my home to fund a runaway fantasy with his brother's wife. He had sold out his wife, his newborn son, and his own flesh and blood brother for a white woman who demanded a life she refused to work for. Julian cried louder, his tiny face turning red against the harsh cold. I pulled my thin wool coat tightly around him, trying to create a cocoon of warmth against my chest. I had no car. Jamal had taken my SUV yesterday under the guise of getting it detailed before bringing the baby home. I checked my pockets. I had my identification, my useless drained debit cards, and a dead cell phone. I needed cash immediately. Julian needed formula and a warm place to sleep. My mind calculated the assets I currently possessed. I looked down at my left hand. The custom platinum wedding band with the 2-carat center stones sparkled mockingly in the dull winter light. I had paid for half of it myself because Jamal's credit was too poor to secure the financing. Now it was my only lifeline. The nearest pawn shop was on Miller Avenue, exactly 3 miles away. In normal circumstances, a 3-mile walk is a minor inconvenience. 5 days after major abdominal surgery, it is a death march. I began to walk, putting one foot in front of the other. The wind whipped down the suburban streets, biting at my exposed neck and ankles. With every step, my C-section scar screamed in violent protest. It felt as though someone was dragging a serrated blade across my lower stomach, tearing at the fresh sutures. I clamped my jaw shut, tasting copper where I had bitten the inside of my cheek to keep from crying out. I focused entirely on Julian, his breathing, his warmth against my skin. I hummed a low, steady tune to soothe him, forcing my legs to keep moving past the warm houses and running cars of people living normal, safe lives. A mile in my vision began to blur. The physical exertion was tearing at my healing tissue. I could feel a damp warmth spreading across my surgical dressing, knowing with terrifying certainty that I was bleeding through the bandages. 2 miles in the affluent suburban sidewalks faded into cracked concrete and abandoned storefronts. The sky grew darker, the temperature dropping rapidly as the afternoon faded. My boots felt filled with lead. Every muscle in my body begged me to sit down on the frozen curb and just give up. But forensic accountants do not give up. We find the missing numbers. We balance the ledger. I kept walking, driven purely by the primal instinct to keep my son alive. Finally, the flickering neon sign of Miller Avenue Pawn and Loan buzzed through the gray afternoon. I pushed open the heavy glass door, a bell chiming harshly overhead. The shop smelled of old dust, stale cigarette smoke, and desperation. Behind the scratched glass counter stood a man with a thick beard and hard, assessing eyes. He looked me up and down, taking in my disheveled hair, my pale face, and the crying infant bundled inside my coat. He knew exactly what he was looking at. He was looking at prey. I walked up to the counter, my legs trembling so badly I had to lean my entire body weight against the glass to stay upright. I pulled the platinum ring off my finger. The metal was freezing against my skin. I placed it on the counter and pushed it toward him. "I need to sell this," I said, my voice hoarse and raw from the cold. "I need cash today." The pawnbroker picked up the ring, pulling a jeweler's loop over his eye. He examined the stone, rotating it slowly under the harsh overhead light. He took his time, letting the heavy silence stretch, letting my desperation fill the cramped room. "This ring was appraised at $15,000, I told him, trying to project a professional confidence I absolutely did not feel. "The center stone is flawless. I have the certification papers at my house, though I cannot access them right now." He dropped the ring onto a digital scale and let out a dry, raspy laugh. "Papers do not mean anything if they are not in your hand, lady. And without papers, this is just another piece of metal." He looked at me, his gaze lingering on the way I protectively clutched my crying baby. "I can give you $400. I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. $400. That is an insult. The gold alone is worth more than that. I am not asking for retail value, but you know exactly what this is worth. Please, I just had a baby. I am locked out of my house. I just need enough to get a hotel and some formula." He slid the ring back across the counter toward me, his expression entirely devoid of empathy. "Then go sell it to someone else. But you and I both know there is not another buyer within 10 miles of here, and it looks like you are not in any condition to walk much further. Take the 400 or take a walk. It is your choice." He held all the power and he knew it. He was weaponizing my vulnerability, leveraging my child's hunger against my pride. I looked at the ring. It represented 4 years of lies, a fraudulent marriage, and a stolen house. It meant absolutely nothing to me anymore. But $400 meant survival. It meant a bus ticket to the only place I could go where I would not freeze to death on the street tonight. My mother Darlene's house in Atlanta. It was a toxic, hostile environment, a place I had sworn never to return to after spending my entire youth trying to escape her constant belittling. But pride was a luxury for people with bank accounts, and right now I was destitute. I took a deep breath, swallowing the bitter taste of humiliation. "I will take it," I said. He counted out $20 bills, snapping them onto the glass counter with infuriating slowness. I grabbed the cash, shoving it deep into my coat pocket, and turned away from the counter without another word. I pushed back out into the freezing winter air, the wind immediately biting at my tear-stained cheeks. I walked 2 blocks down to the local bus stop, shivering violently as I waited for the city transport that would take me to the Greyhound station. I looked down at Julian, who was finally quiet, sleeping fitfully against my chest. I brushed my thumb across his cold, soft cheek, making a silent, unbreakable vow. Jamal and Brittany thought they had ruined me. They thought stripping me of my assets and leaving me bleeding in the snow would break my spirit and erase my existence. They did not realize that by taking everything I cared about, they had unleashed a woman who no longer had any rules left to follow. I held the meager cash tight in my pocket, stepping onto the idling bus. "I am going to find them," I whispered into the freezing air, making a promise to my son and to myself. "And when I do, I am going to take back every single thing they stole, and I will make them pay for every tear you shed today." The Greyhound station in the dead of winter is a sanctuary for the desperate. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a sickly yellow glow, casting long shadows across the scuffed linoleum floor. The air smelled of diesel exhaust, damp wool, and stale coffee. I found a spot near the back wall, shifting Julian higher on my chest. My surgical stitches screamed a fiery reminder of my physical reality. Every breath felt like inhaling broken glass, but I pushed the pain down into a tightly sealed box inside my mind. I had a ticket to buy. A ticket to Atlanta. A ticket back into the very nightmare I had spent my entire 20s trying to escape. I joined the slow-moving line at the ticket counter. There were 5 people ahead of me. Right at the front of the line stood an elderly African-American man. He wore a heavy wool peacoat that had seen better days and a neatly pressed fedora. His posture commanded respect, but his hands were trembling as he frantically emptied his pockets onto the scratchy plexiglass counter. Crumpled bills and loose silver coins spilled out. The ticket agent, a young guy with a smirking face and zero patience, tapped his pen loudly against the counter. "Look, man, I told you 3 times. The fare to Charlotte is $88. You have 48. You are $40 short. Move out of the line so paying customers can get through." The older man leaned forward, his voice shaking but carrying a heavy, desperate dignity. "Please, son. My wife is at Emory University Hospital. The doctors called me an hour ago. She is not going to make it through the night. I have to get on that bus. I can mail you the rest of the money tomorrow. I give you my word as a man." The cashier let out a loud, obnoxious laugh that echoed through the terminal. "Do I look like a charity to you? Greyhound does not take promises from broke old men. Step aside before I call security and have you removed for loitering." The cruelty in his voice was like a physical strike. I watched the older man shrink, his shoulders slumping as the fight drained out of him. He reached out with shaking hands to gather his crumpled bills. People in line behind him were grumbling, checking their watches, looking away. Nobody intervened. They just wanted him out of the way. A familiar heat flared in my chest. I knew that exact feeling. The feeling of being completely stripped of your dignity, while people in power looked down at you like dirt on their shoes. The pawnbroker had just done it to me less than an hour ago. Jamal had done it to me this morning. I looked down at Julian, who was sleeping peacefully against my collarbone. I had exactly $400 in my pocket. A one-way ticket to Atlanta was going to eat up a significant chunk of that. I needed formula. I needed diapers. I needed a financial cushion for dealing with my mother, Darlene, who would undoubtedly demand rent the second I stepped onto her porch. But as a forensic accountant, I lived by the numbers, and right now the math was simple. $40 was the difference between this man saying goodbye to the love of his life and living with the regret of a closed door forever. I stepped out of my spot in line, ignoring the angry sighs of the people behind me, and walked straight up to the counter. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out 2 crisp $20 bills from the pawn shop stack, and slammed them onto the plexiglass right over the old man's scattered change. "Print the ticket," I told the cashier, my voice sharp and loud enough to command the immediate attention of the entire room. The cashier blinked, looking from the money to my face. His smirk faltered under my glare. I said, "Print the ticket," I repeated, leaning in closer. "And if you ever speak to an elder with that kind of disrespect again, I promise you I will personally find your regional manager and make sure your employment history becomes a lot shorter than this line. Do your job." The cashier swallowed hard, snatched the bills, and began typing frantically on his keyboard. The older man turned to look at me. Up close, his eyes were a striking deep amber framed by deep wrinkles of a life fully lived. He did not look at me with pity. He looked at me with an intense, calculating intelligence that seemed entirely out of place for a man begging for bus fare. He took in the exhaustion on my face, the slight hunch in my posture from my surgical wound, and the newborn strapped to my chest. "You did not have to do that, daughter," he said, his voice suddenly steady, a stark contrast to the desperate tone he had used with the cashier. "You look like you need every dollar you have." I offered him a tight, exhausted smile. "I know exactly what it feels like to have a door slammed in your face when you need it open the most. Go see your wife, sir." The cashier slid the printed ticket across the counter. The older man took it, but he did not immediately walk away. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen. It was an expensive custom piece, completely at odds with his worn coat and missing bus fare. He tore off the blank receipt stub from the bottom of his ticket. "What is your name?" he asked, locking his amber eyes onto mine. "Your full name." I hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Kiara," I said. "Kiara Washington." He wrote it down with slow, deliberate strokes. He folded the torn piece of paper and tucked it carefully into his breast pocket, as if it were a highly classified document. "I will not forget you, Kiara Washington. A kindness given in the dark always finds its way back to the light." He gave me a single, respectful nod, turned, and walked toward the boarding gates with a stride that was suddenly strong and purposeful. I watched him go, shaking my head slightly at the bizarre encounter before stepping up to the counter, forcing myself to focus on the reality at hand. One ticket to Atlanta, I told the now completely silent and compliant cashier. I paid for my fare. I bought a pack of diapers from the station convenience store and 2 bottles of ready-to-feed infant formula. I stood in the harsh lighting of the terminal restroom, changing Julian on a hard plastic fold-out table, whispering apologies to him for the cold air and the rough surface. When I finally zipped up his fleece suit, I checked my pockets one last time, calculating my exact remaining balance. I had exactly $12 left to my name. $12 to start a new life. $12 to protect my son from a world that had just bared its teeth at us. They called the boarding for the Atlanta Express over the loudspeaker. I gathered my meager belongings and stepped out into the freezing night air to board the idling bus. I found a seat near the back by the window, wrapping my coat around Julian to block the draft from the glass. The heavy diesel engine roared to life, vibrating through the floorboards. As the bus pulled out of the station and merged onto the darkened highway, I leaned my head against the cold window pane. I was heading straight into the lion's den. My mother Darlene was waiting in Atlanta, and I knew she would not offer me a warm bed or a hot meal without extracting a heavy emotional tax. She had spent my entire life breaking me down to elevate my younger sister Tasha. Tasha was the golden child who had never held a steady job a day in her life, always coddled, always praised, while I was expected to finance their delusions. Returning to their house completely broke with a newborn was going to be psychological warfare. I closed my eyes, letting the rumble of the highway lull me into a state of hyper-focused calculation. Jamal thought he had left me with nothing. He thought my empty bank accounts and stolen house would keep me paralyzed. He underestimated the sheer force of a mother with her back against the wall. He forgot that I can read the invisible ink on any financial transaction, and I already knew he was not smart enough to hide his tracks from me forever. I held my $12 tight in my pocket, holding my son even tighter against my chest. I was boarding this bus with empty pockets, a bleeding scar, and a broken marriage. But I was completely unaware that the $40 I had just handed to a stranger at the ticket counter had just bought me the keys to an absolute empire. The Greyhound bus hissed to a stop in downtown Atlanta, the air thick with the damp, biting chill of a southern winter morning. Every single step down the metal stairs of that bus sent a fresh wave of agony radiating from my C-section incision. I held Julian tight against my chest, praying my own body heat was enough to counter the freezing wind cutting through my thin coat. I had exactly $12 in my pocket and a heart full of cold, calculating fury. Standing on the cracked sidewalk, I faced the brutal reality of my destination. I had spent my entire adult life building a financial fortress, specifically to ensure I would never have to return to this exact neighborhood. Darlene was not a mother who offered warm soup and a shoulder to cry on. She was a creditor who collected emotional debts with ruthless efficiency. I walked the 4 blocks to her house, my breathing shallow, my boots heavy on the pavement. I knocked twice on the peeling wooden front door. The door swung open, and Darlene stood there in a floor-length silk robe she definitely could not afford on her grocery store cashier salary. She did not reach out for her grandson. She did not ask if I was bleeding or in pain. Her eyes raked over my disheveled hair, my pale face, and the cheap duffel bag hanging off my shoulder. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," she said, crossing her arms and blocking the doorway. "I heard what happened with Jamal. Word travels fast when your husband leaves you high and dry for a white woman." The sheer venom in her voice was a masterclass in cruelty. I pushed past her into the stifling heat of the hallway, ignoring her aggressive posture. The house smelled of cheap vanilla air fresheners and stale resentment. "I need a place to stay," I said, my voice raspy and exhausted. He locked me out. He forged the deed to my house. Darlene let out a sharp, mocking laugh, slamming the front door shut behind me. "Forged the deed or took what he was owed. You brought this on yourself, Kiara. You were always acting like you were better than everyone else with your fancy college degrees and your corporate suits." If you were not always buried in your forensic accounting spreadsheets, maybe Jamal would not have had to look at a white woman for affection. A man needs a wife, not an auditor. The words hit their mark exactly as she intended. She was weaponizing my success, defending the man who had just left me and her own newborn grandson entirely destitute. She resented me because I had escaped the cycle of poverty she wallowed in, and my current downfall was exactly the entertainment she craved. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. I absolutely refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Before I could formulate a response, heavy footsteps clattered down the wooden stairs. My younger sister Tasha glided into the hallway looking like she had just stepped out of a reality television shoot. She wore a designer velour tracksuit, holding a perfectly manicured hand up to inspect her acrylic nails. Tasha was 28, had never held a job for more than 3 weeks, and somehow always had her rent and car note paid by Darlene, the ultimate golden child. "Oh my God, Kiara, you look terrible," Tasha said, not bothering to lower her voice. She did not even glance at the baby wrapped against my chest. Instead, her eyes zeroed in on my open diaper bag, resting on the entryway table. I turned my back for exactly 10 seconds to adjust Julian in his blanket, to ease the pressure on my burning scar. That was all it took. I heard the distinct rustle of fabric. I whipped around. Tasha was sliding my last $12 out of the side pocket of the bag. "What are you doing?" I demanded, stepping forward. The sudden movement sent a spike of white-hot pain through my abdomen, but I ignored it. "Put that back right now." Tasha rolled her eyes, slipping the crumpled bills into her designer pocket with casual arrogance. "Relax. It is just $12. I need to get my iced caramel macchiato before my acting audition today. You are staying here for free anyway, so just consider it your contribution to the household." "That is the last of my cash, Tasha," I said, my voice shaking with a rage that terrified even me. "That money is for Julian. It is for his formula and his diapers. Hand it over." I reached for her wrist, but before my fingers could make contact, Darlene shoved herself violently between us. "Do not you dare lay a hand on your sister." Darlene shrieked, her face inches from mine. "Tasha has a very important callback today, and she needs to be in the right headspace. You march up in here looking like a stray dog, bringing all your drama and your failed marriage into my peaceful home, and then you have the audacity to attack my daughter." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. I was holding my hungry newborn son, shivering from the cold, recovering from major surgery, while she vehemently defended a thief stealing my last dollar for a coffee. "Give me my money, Darlene," I said, dropping my voice to a dangerously low register. "I need it for the baby." Darlene pointed a long acrylic nail toward the front door, her eyes blazing with malicious satisfaction. "You disrespect my house and you disrespect your sister. You can turn right back around and freeze on the street. You think because you lived in a big suburban house, you can come back here and run things. You are nothing now, Kiara. Jamal proved that to the whole world. You have 30 seconds to take that crying baby down to the basement, or you can get out of my sight." The ultimatum hung in the stifling air. I looked at Tasha, who was smirking triumphantly behind our mother. I looked at Darlene, whose posture practically vibrated with the thrill of finally having me under her heel. My forensic mind quickly calculated my immediate survival odds on the streets of Atlanta in January with a newborn. The odds were 0. I needed a roof, even a hostile one. I had to secure the perimeter for my son before I could begin my counteroffensive. I swallowed my pride. I swallowed the burning rage that was threatening to consume my entire body. I grabbed the diaper bag without another word and turned away from them. I opened the door leading to the basement and slowly descended the rickety wooden stairs, bracing myself against the handrail as my stitches screamed in protest. The temperature dropped 10 degrees the moment I reached the bottom. The basement was damp, unfinished, and smelled heavily of mildew and old cardboard. The concrete floor was freezing through the thin soles of my boots. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, illuminating a sagging, stained futon in the corner and stacks of forgotten junk. This was my new reality. A dark, freezing hole while the people who were supposed to love me laughed upstairs sipping coffee bought with my baby's diaper money. I gently laid Julian on the center of the futon, building a barricade of old pillows around him. I took off my own coat and wrapped him in it, ensuring he was warm enough against the biting chill of the room. He cooed softly, completely unaware of the war zone we had just entered, falling peacefully back to sleep. I stood in the center of the cold concrete floor, taking a deep breath of the musty air. Darlene and Tasha thought they had broken me. They thought stripping me of my money and forcing me into a dark basement would keep me compliant and defeated. They fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. I reached into the hidden zippered compartment of my diaper bag. My fingers brushed against the cold metal casing of my laptop. I pulled it out and set it on top of a sturdy cardboard box, pulling up a plastic crate to use as a chair. I flipped the screen open. The harsh blue light illuminated the damp concrete walls, casting long shadows across the room. They took my house. They took my money. They took my dignity. But they forgot that I am a master of forensic accounting. I do not need a boardroom or a legal team to wage war. All I need to completely dismantle an empire is a reliable Wi-Fi connection and a keyboard. I cracked my knuckles, staring at the blinking cursor. It was time to hunt. I sat on the overturned plastic crate and pulled my laptop close to my chest. The harsh blue light of the screen illuminated the damp concrete walls, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. Julian was sleeping soundly in his makeshift fortress of old pillows, wrapped tightly in my heavy winter coat. His gentle, steady breathing was the only pure thing left in this house. Everything else was tainted with betrayal and malice. Jamal thought he was a mastermind. He thought that because he changed a few passwords and cleared his browser history, he had vanished into thin air. But Jamal was arrogant, and arrogance always leaves a digital trail. As a forensic accountant, I do not look at money as physical cash. I look at it as kinetic energy. Energy cannot be destroyed, it only changes forms and locations. I bypassed our empty joint bank accounts and dove straight into the hidden metadata of our financial history. I started by pulling my own credit report to find the exact financial institution that processed the fraudulent deed transfer for my house. It took me less than 20 minutes to find the wire confirmation number buried in the closing documents of the sale. From there, I accessed a backdoor tracing software I frequently used for complex corporate audits. I typed in the routing sequence and hit enter. The money from the sale of my beautiful home had bounced through a Delaware shell company before landing in a private offshore account. I ran the registration details for the Delaware entity. Jamal had named it JB Holdings, Jamal and Brittany. The sheer audacity made my stomach churn violently, but I did not stop typing. I dug deeper, cracking the firewall on the holding company to view the transaction ledger. That was when I noticed something entirely unexpected. The account was not just holding the stolen equity from my house. It was bloated with cash. There were monthly deposits of $10,000, $15,000, sometimes $20,000 dating back nearly 2 years. My eyes darted across the screen, trying to make sense of the numbers. Jamal was a mid-level financial manager. He absolutely did not make this kind of money legally. I traced the origin of those recurring deposits, following the digital breadcrumbs back to a regional bank in Georgia. The origin account belonged to Apex Construction. I stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. Apex Construction was owned by Terrence Jamal's older brother. Terrence had built that commercial contracting business from the ground up, pouring his blood and sweat into every concrete foundation he poured. He worked grueling hours in the sun to provide a beautiful life for his family. Jamal had convinced Terrence to let him handle the company payroll and vendor accounts, claiming he wanted to save his brother money on outside bookkeepers. Terrence had trusted him completely. I pulled the public tax filings for Apex Construction and cross-referenced them with the vendor payment logs flowing into JB Holdings. The pattern was horrifyingly clear. Jamal had set up an elaborate network of phantom vendors, fake drywall suppliers, ghost consulting firms, and non-existent logistics companies. He had been generating fraudulent invoices, approving them himself, and wiring Terrence's hard-earned profits directly into a secret account to fund Brittany's lavish lifestyle. He was bleeding his own brother dry so he could buy designer bags and first-class tickets for his brother's wife. The betrayal was so deep, so entirely devoid of basic human decency, that it almost defied logic. Jamal had not just destroyed his marriage, he had destroyed his own bloodline. He had smiled in his brother's face at Sunday dinners, while systematically robbing him blind. I spent the next 4 days trapped in that freezing basement, barely sleeping. The physical pain from my C-section was a constant burning reminder of why I could not stop. My scar throbbed with every movement, but I survived on tap water and cheap crackers, hoarding the formula for Julian. Upstairs, Darlene and Tasha lived their lives with loud, oblivious cruelty. The television blared constantly, shaking the floorboards above my head. Tasha stomped across the hallway in her heavy boots, loudly complaining about how my baby crying was ruining her beauty sleep. Once a day, the basement door would swing open, and Darlene would shout down the stairs, telling me I was a massive burden and a disgrace to the family name. She would throw a paper plate with cold leftovers down the steps, hitting the concrete floor like she was feeding a stray animal in the yard. I did not respond. I did not yell back. I simply walked over, picked up the cold food, ate it to keep my strength up, and went right back to my keyboard. Every insult, every slam of the door upstairs only sharpened my focus. The cold air seeped into my bones, but the rage kept me burning hot. They thought I was cowering in the dark. They had no idea I was building an arsenal. I compiled everything meticulously. I did not just find the transactions, I documented the exact IP login logs. I proved that the fake vendor invoices were generated from the IP address of our home Wi-Fi network, placing Jamal firmly at the scene of the crime. I matched the dates of the largest embezzled wire transfers to the exact dates Brittany posted photos on social media, flaunting new diamond tennis bracelets and luxury vacations to Dubai. I took screenshots of her grinning in front of 5-star hotels while Terrence was working 12-hour shifts on construction sites to provide for her. I organized the files into a perfectly indexed digital dossier. Wire fraud, grand larceny, identity theft, corporate embezzlement. It was an impenetrable fortress of felonies. I was holding a nuclear bomb in my hands, and I had not even found their physical location yet. I turned my attention back to the money trail. The massive bulk transfer containing both the stolen equity from my house and the accumulated embezzled funds from Terrence had moved from the offshore account back into the United States just 2 days ago. I tracked the routing number to a high-end luxury real estate brokerage in Miami, Florida. They had bought a property, in cash. I hacked into the Miami-Dade County Public Property Registry, bypassing the standard search portals to access the raw data feeds. I filtered the recent cash transactions matching the exact dollar amount of the wire transfer. The database spun for a few excruciating seconds before generating a hit. A luxury oceanfront penthouse condo in a highly exclusive building. I requested the digital copy of the deed. The progress bar loaded slowly on my screen. I sat in the damp darkness of the basement, watching the green bar inch closer to 100%. My hands hovered over the keyboard, my breathing completely silent. Just as the PDF of the Miami deed flashed onto my screen, displaying the names Jamal and Brittany, as the sole owners, the atmosphere in the house suddenly changed. The loud television upstairs was abruptly muted. The constant bickering between Darlene and Tasha stopped dead. A strange, heavy silence fell over the entire property, suffocating and tense. Then I heard it. Heavy, synchronized footsteps marched up the wooden planks of Darlene's front porch. It was not the casual step of a mail carrier or the quick pace of a delivery driver. It was a deliberate, powerful march. Multiple people moving with absolute, unyielding authority. I froze, staring at the basement ceiling, as the heavy footsteps halted directly at the front door. The silence that followed was thicker than the damp air around me. I pulled my laptop tight against my chest, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Julian shifted in his sleep, letting out a soft sigh. I held my breath, waiting for whatever was standing on the other side of that door to strike. The heavy, synchronized footsteps I heard marching up the porch did not belong to a corporate hitman or the police. It was just my mother Darlene and my sister Tasha returning from a morning shopping trip funded by the $12 Tasha had stolen from my diaper bag. That was day one. The next 14 days were a masterclass in psychological warfare. I spent exactly 2 weeks trapped in that freezing concrete hole beneath their feet. 2 weeks of grinding my teeth while Darlene stood at the top of the basement stairs, shouting down that I was a fundamental failure as a woman. She would purposefully invite her church friends over and speak loudly enough for her voice to carry through the thin floorboards. She detailed how Jamal left me because I lacked the warmth and submissiveness a successful man requires. She spun a twisted narrative for her audience, framing my corporate success as a repulsive character flaw. To Darlene, my ability to provide for my family was the exact reason my family had fallen apart. She reveled in my downfall, packaging it as a cautionary tale for anyone who dared to step outside the boundaries of the life she understood. Tasha was even worse. My younger sister would venture down the wooden steps just far enough to drop her dry cleaning at my feet. She demanded I hand wash her club outfits in the utility sink if I wanted permission to use the hot water upstairs for Julian's bottles. She paraded around the house wearing the few clean clothes I had managed to salvage, mocking my physical appearance as I recovered from my surgery. I washed her clothes. I scrubbed Darlene's floors. I endured the biting cold of the damp basement walls. I did it all with a completely blank face, because every single night when the house went quiet, I retreated to my makeshift desk. I opened my laptop and continued tightening the digital noose around Jamal and his brother's wife. I mapped out their offshore accounts, tracked the fraudulent shell companies, and secured every piece of evidence needed to trigger a federal indictment. Darlene and Tasha thought my silence meant I was defeated. They mistook my tactical patience for submission. They had absolutely no idea that the woman washing their clothes in the basement was currently holding the power to obliterate multiple lives with the push of a button. On the morning of the 15th day, the atmosphere in the house shifted violently. I was sitting on my plastic crate, wrapping Julian tightly in my heavy winter coat, when a low, resonant vibration shook the cracked foundation of the property. It was the deep, unmistakable purr of absolute mechanical power. I stood up and peered out the narrow, dirt-caked basement window at street level. A vehicle the size of a private jet was rolling to a stop. It was a stretched, custom black Maybach limousine. The massive tires effortlessly crushed Darlene's overgrown dead azalea bushes as the driver parked half on the street and half on her weed-choked lawn. The sheer wealth radiating from the polished chrome and the pitch-black tinted windows looked entirely alien against the backdrop of our decaying neighborhood. The screaming from upstairs was immediate. I heard a kitchen chair scrape violently across the linoleum floor. Tasha shrieked at the top of her lungs, swearing to our mother that the reality television producers she had tagged in her desperate social media audition videos had finally come to discover her. Darlene was yelling about finding her good wig and finding her slippers. The front door ripped open. I could hear their bare feet slapping against the frozen concrete of the porch. They were literally pushing and elbowing each other to get to the curb, fighting like starving animals over a scrap of meat. The driver's side door of the Maybach swung open smoothly. A man stepped out, and the temperature in the yard seemed to drop another 10 degrees. He was massive, standing at least 6'4", wearing a razor-sharp charcoal suit and a discreet communication earpiece. His posture was military rigid, and his expression was carved directly from stone. Tasha immediately leaned against the hood of Darlene's rusted sedan, popping her hip out and running a hand through her hair. She actually tried to introduce herself, pitching her voice high and asking what studio he represented. The driver did not even blink. He looked completely through Tasha as if she were made of glass. He bypassed the front door, stepped off the concrete path, and walked deliberately through the dead grass around the side of the house. He was heading straight for the rusted iron cellar doors that led directly down into my basement. Darlene chased after him, her silk robe flapping wildly in the winter wind. She demanded to know who he was and threatened to call the neighborhood watch if he did not state his business with her beautiful, talented daughter. The man ignored her completely. He reached the cellar doors, gripped the rusted iron handles, and pulled them open with effortless strength. Harsh winter sunlight flooded down the concrete steps, temporarily blinding me. The towering man looked down into the damp, miserable hole. His dark eyes bypassed the dirt, the peeling paint, and the makeshift pillow fortress I had built for my son. His eyes found mine, and he looked at me with absolute profound respect. "Miss Kiara," he said, his deep voice echoing off the concrete walls. "I am Malik. It is time to read the will." Darlene practically threw herself to the edge of the cellar steps, her mouth hanging open so wide her jaw looked unhinged. "What will?" she screeched, grabbing the metal railing. "She does not know anyone with a limo. She is a dumped, broke single mother living in my basement. You have the wrong person." Malik did not acknowledge the noise coming from her mouth. He did not even glance in her direction. He simply extended a gloved hand down the stairs toward me, waiting patiently. I closed my laptop, sliding it securely into the hidden waterproof compartment of my diaper bag. I picked up Julian, holding him tight against my chest. I did not say a single word to Darlene. I walked up those cold concrete steps, my head held high, my spine perfectly straight despite the lingering pain of my surgery. As I reached the surface, Malik gently took the heavy diaper bag from my shoulder, handling it like it held the crown jewels. With his other hand, he snapped open a massive black umbrella, shielding Julian and me from the biting wind and the invasive stares of the neighbors, who were now pouring out onto their porches to watch the spectacle. "Where do you think you are going?" Darlene screamed, grabbing my arm with her sharp acrylic nails. "If you get in that car, you can never come back to this house. You hear me, Kiara? I will change the locks today." I stopped and turned my head slowly to look at the woman who had spent 2 weeks treating her own daughter and newborn grandson like stray dogs. I looked at the dilapidated house, the peeling paint, the bitter resentment etched into her face, and the sister shivering in her cheap velour tracksuit. I pulled my arm out of her grasp with a calm, deliberate motion. "I never planned to," I said. I stepped into the pristine, leather-bound warmth of the Maybach. Malik closed the heavy armored door behind me, sealing out the cold air and the frantic shouting. I settled into the plush seat, looking out the tinted window, as my family stood barefoot in the frozen dirt, watching the limousine pull away from the curb and glide smoothly down the street. I had boarded a bus to Atlanta, with $12 in my pocket, but I was leaving the slums behind in a multi-million-dollar vehicle, ready to find out exactly whose will had just changed the trajectory of my entire life. The heavy armored door of the Maybach closed, shutting out the freezing wind and the frantic screaming of my mother and sister. Inside the cabin, the air was climate-controlled and smelled faintly of expensive leather and cedar. I sank into the plush seat, holding Julian tightly against my chest. The contrast between the damp, freezing concrete of Darlene's basement and the absolute luxury of this vehicle was so jarring it made my head spin. Malik slid behind the wheel, tapping a button on the console that raised a soundproof partition between the front and rear of the vehicle. The massive car pulled away from the curb, gliding over the cracked pavement of the neighborhood with zero turbulence. I looked down at my son, who had slept through the entire chaotic scene on the front lawn. His tiny chest rose and fell in a peaceful rhythm. For the first time in 2 weeks, I let out a breath that did not hurt my lungs. We merged onto the highway, heading straight toward the towering glass and steel skyline of downtown Atlanta. I did not ask where we were going. My forensic accounting background had trained me to observe and gather data before asking questions. I took in the details of the car. The privacy screens, the integrated secure Wi-Fi network, the discreet bulletproof rating on the window glass. This was not a rented limousine for a high school prom. This was a corporate fortress belonging to someone with immense institutional wealth. The kind of wealth that operates invisibly behind shell companies and heavily guarded trusts. Malik navigated the Maybach into a private underground parking garage beneath one of the tallest skyscrapers in the financial district. He opened my door with that same unwavering respect, shielding Julian from the cool garage air as he escorted me to a private executive elevator. The doors slid shut and the elevator shot upward silently, bypassing the lobby and reception floors entirely. My C-section scar gave a dull throb, a harsh reminder of my physical vulnerability, but my mind was sharpening with every floor we climbed. The elevator chimed and opened directly into a sprawling mahogany-paneled boardroom that occupied the entire top floor of the building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the entire city of Atlanta. The space was immaculate, intimidating, and completely silent. Sitting at the head of a massive polished conference table was a distinguished older man in a tailored navy suit. He stood up immediately as Malik escorted me into the room. "Welcome, Miss Kiara," the man said, gesturing to a plush leather chair. "My name is Attorney Harrison Caldwell. I am the senior partner at this firm and the primary executor for the Sterling estate. Please sit down. Can I get you anything for the baby?" I took the seat, carefully adjusting Julian in my arms. "I am fine," I said, keeping my voice steady and professional. "I want to know why I am here. Your driver said it was time to read the will." Attorney Caldwell offered a small, solemn nod. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a heavy gold-plated fountain pen, placing it gently on the center of the mahogany table. My breath hitched. It was the exact same custom pen the elderly man at the Greyhound station had used to write down my name on a torn boarding pass. Elias Sterling was a very private man. Attorney Caldwell began taking his seat. To the public, he did not exist. There are no photographs of him online, no social media profiles, and no interviews. But in the commercial real estate and tech infrastructure sectors, he was a titan. He built a vast network of data centers and commercial properties across the Southeast over the last 40 years. He was a self-made billionaire who believed in moving quietly. I stared at the gold pen, my mind flashing back to the dirty linoleum floor of the bus station. The crumpled bills, the frantic shaking of his hands, the cruel smirk of the ticket cashier. If he was a titan, I asked slowly, why was he short $40 for a bus ticket? Why was he begging a cashier to let him go see his dying wife? Attorney Caldwell let out a heavy sigh, his professional demeanor softening into genuine grief. Elias was old school. He carried cash and refused to use mobile banking on his personal devices. Earlier that afternoon, his wallet and black card were stolen while he was walking through the city. He had no identification and no immediate access to his funds without going through our corporate security protocols, which would have taken hours to clear. And he did not have hours. The hospital had just called him. His wife of 50 years was taking her final breaths at Emory University Hospital. He rushed to the nearest station in a complete panic, just trying to get to her bedside. He looked at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Elias told me what happened at that ticket counter. He told me how the cashier humiliated him, how the people in line rolled their eyes and checked their watches. He told me that he felt completely invisible, standing there watching the clock run out on his chance to say goodbye to his wife. And then he told me about you. I looked down at Julian, swallowing the lump forming in my throat. "I just did what anyone should have done," I whispered. "But they did not," Attorney Caldwell corrected sharply. "Only you did. A woman bleeding through a surgical bandage, holding a newborn baby who clearly needed every dollar she had. You did not hesitate. You gave him your last $40, and you demanded that the world show him respect. Because of you, Elias made it to the hospital. He walked into that room and he held his wife's hand as she crossed over. He got to say goodbye. A heavy, profound silence filled the boardroom. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of that night at the station settling over me in a completely new light. "He made it," I said softly. "I am glad he made it." "He did," Attorney Caldwell said, his voice thick with emotion. "But Elias had a bad heart, Ms. Kiara. The stress of the robbery, the frantic rush to the hospital, and the profound grief of losing his wife were simply too much for his system to bear. His heart gave out 3 days ago. He passed away peacefully in his sleep." The news hit me like a physical blow. The fierce, intelligent amber eyes that had locked onto mine at the bus station were gone. I felt a sudden, sharp ache of loss for a man I had only spoken to for 2 minutes. "I am so sorry," I said, my voice breaking slightly. He seemed like a truly remarkable man. He was Attorney Caldwell, agreed. And he was also a man who believed that character is revealed in the dark when nobody is watching. Elias had no living heirs. He and his wife never had children. For the last 5 years, he has been searching for a successor to take over his primary holding company. He interviewed Ivy League executives, cutthroat hedge fund managers, and brilliant developers. He rejected all of them. He said they all knew how to multiply money, but none of them knew the actual value of a dollar or the value of human dignity. Attorney Caldwell reached down and picked up a thick leather-bound portfolio. He slid it across the polished mahogany table until it rested directly in front of me. The night he got back from the hospital, Elias called me into his office, Attorney Caldwell explained. He had your name, and he utilized our private investigative team to find out exactly who you were. He learned about your career as a forensic accountant. He learned about your impeccable professional record. And he learned about the devastating betrayals you have suffered over the last 3 weeks. He drafted a legally binding amendment to his living trust that very night. I looked down at the portfolio, afraid to touch it. What does this mean? I asked. It means, Attorney Caldwell said, leaning forward, that Elias Sterling has transferred complete operational control and majority ownership of Sterling Holdings directly to you. My forensic accounting brain instinctively kicked into overdrive. I opened the heavy leather cover and began scanning the summary balance sheets, the liquidity ratios, and the corporate structuring documents. My eyes darted across the columns of numbers, rapidly verifying the assets and the outstanding liabilities. The numbers were staggering. It was an impeccably managed portfolio of commercial real estate performing tech sector investments and liquid cash reserves. It was not a struggling enterprise. It was a perfectly oiled financial machine. Sterling Holdings is currently valued at nearly $40 million, Attorney Caldwell stated clearly. The transition of power is immediate. You have full executive authority to liquidate, acquire, or restructure any assets within the portfolio as you see fit. You are the CEO, Ms. Kiara. The empire is yours. I sat back in the plush leather chair, my mind racing. $40 million. Less than an hour ago, I was sitting on an overturned plastic crate in a freezing basement, calculating how many days I could stretch a single box of baby formula. Now I was holding the keys to a corporate kingdom. I looked at the signature line on the trust amendment. I reached out and picked up the gold-plated fountain pen Elias had left for me. The metal was heavy and warm in my hand. I signed my name, ensuring every loop and slant was perfectly my own, securing my future. And my son's future with permanent, undeniable ink. Excellent, Attorney Caldwell said, gathering the primary documents. Malik is now your personal head of security, and this legal team reports directly to you. However, there is one more item of business we need to address today. He reached under the table and produced a secondary, much thinner dossier. This one was bound in standard red legal framing. Elias was a thorough man, Attorney Caldwell explained, sliding the red dossier toward me. When his investigators looked into your situation regarding your ex-husband, Jamal, and his current partner, Brittany, they discovered something highly relevant to your new position. Sterling Holdings operates several subsidiary management firms that handle localized residential real estate debt. I strongly suggest you review the current acquisitions listed on page 3. I opened the red folder. As a forensic auditor, I am trained to spot anomalies, hidden connections, and overlapping corporate structures. I flipped to page 3, scanning the list of residential properties and mortgage debts recently acquired by one of Sterling Holdings' subsidiary firms. My breath caught sharply in my throat. I stopped breathing entirely, staring at the printed addresses on the page. The first asset listed was a secondary mortgage debt that had been bought out by the holding company. I recognized the address immediately. It was the exact address of my mother Darlene's house. The very house where she and Tasha were currently standing on the lawn. I moved my finger down the page to the second asset. It was the deed to a newly constructed luxury oceanfront penthouse condo in Miami, Florida. The holding company owned the parent corporation that held the deed to the property. I looked at the tenant names registered to the unit: Jamal and Brittany. I slowly looked up from the dossier, meeting Attorney Caldwell's highly professional, completely neutral gaze. Sterling Holdings owns the debt on Darlene's house, I stated, my voice deathly calm. And Sterling Holdings is the corporate landlord for the Miami condo Jamal and Brittany just bought using my stolen equity. That is legally correct, Ms. Kiara. Attorney Caldwell replied, adjusting his tie. As the CEO of Sterling Holdings, you are now the primary lien holder for your mother's property, and you are the corporate entity that holds the deed to your ex-husband's new residence. You literally own the roofs over their heads. I closed the red dossier, resting my hand flat against the cool, smooth cover. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. Jamal thought he could run. Darlene and Tasha thought they could force me into submission. They all thought they held the power because they had stolen my past. They had absolutely no idea that I just became the sole owner of their future. I sit back in the heavy leather chair, feeling the weight of the red folder under my fingertips. Attorney Caldwell watches me carefully as my eyes scan the first document. It is a promissory note attached to a secondary mortgage. I recognize the property address instantly. It is my mother Darlene's house in Atlanta. The exact house where she and Tasha are currently standing on the front lawn. As a forensic accountant, I am trained to look past the surface of any financial document and find the hidden story. I trace the timeline of the debt. 2 years ago, Darlene took out a massive equity loan against the property. She did not use the money to fix the leaking roof or update the ancient plumbing. She used the cash to fund Tasha's fake influencer career, paying for expensive photo shoots and designer clothes that yielded nothing but massive credit card debt. When Tasha failed to become a star, Darlene simply stopped making the mortgage payments. I read the payment history, closely tracking the descending balance columns. Darlene has been in default for over 4 months. The original bank sold the bad debt to a commercial collection agency, which was then absorbed by a massive real estate holding firm. That holding firm is a direct subsidiary of Sterling Holdings. I look up from the page, meeting Attorney Caldwell's eyes. I state clearly that Darlene is in default and has not paid a single dime in months. Attorney Caldwell gives a sharp professional nod, confirming my assessment. He tells me the bank was preparing to initiate hostile foreclosure proceedings next week before Elias Sterling passed away. Now that decision falls entirely to my discretion. The sheer poetry of the situation washes over me in a wave of cold satisfaction. For 2 weeks, Darlene stood at the top of those basement stairs, reminding me that I was a burden in her home. She threatened to throw me and my newborn son out onto the freezing street because she believed she held all the power. She had absolutely no idea that she was legally squatting in a house she no longer owned. She thought she was the landlord, but she was just a tenant living on borrowed time. I turn the page to the second asset, and my pulse quickens. The document is a warranty deed for a luxury oceanfront penthouse condo in Miami, Florida. This is the exact property Jamal and his brother's wife Brittany purchased using the stolen equity from my house and the embezzled funds from Terrence's construction company. Jamal always hated renting. He always wanted to be the king of his own castle, but he lacked the work ethic to build one. So he stole my castle to buy his. He thought he was a genius by creating a shell company to purchase the condo in cash, hiding behind Brittany's maiden name. But Jamal is a financial amateur, and he made a fatal mistake. He failed to realize that the luxury high-rise building itself is situated on a commercial land lease. The building developers sold the ground rights to a massive commercial real estate conglomerate to fund their construction costs. I follow the corporate umbrella printed on the page, tracing the conglomerate back to its parent company. The trail leads straight back to Sterling Holdings. Attorney Caldwell points to a specific clause highlighted in yellow near the bottom of the page. He explains that because the shell company purchased the unit using demonstrably fraudulent funds, the ground lease contains an immediate forfeiture clause. If illegal activity is proven, the Property Management Corporation has the right to seize the unit and evict the occupants without any standard tenant protections. I stare at the clause, my heart beating a steady, powerful rhythm against my ribs. Jamal stole my safe haven to buy a palace for his mistress. But he built his palace on my land. I literally own the ground beneath his feet. I own the roof over his head. I own every single square inch of the reality he thinks he controls. I close the red folder and slide it back across the polished mahogany table. I do not feel the urge to scream or cry or celebrate. I feel the absolute cold clarity of an executioner drawing a blade. I look at Attorney Caldwell, keeping my voice perfectly level. I tell him I need a formal notice of eviction and foreclosure drafted for the Atlanta property. I want no extensions, no grace periods, and no leniency whatsoever. Darlene has defaulted on her obligations, and Sterling Holdings will execute its right to reclaim the asset. I demand the paperwork be legally airtight, ensuring the 30-day vacate notice is ready for my signature by tomorrow morning. Attorney Caldwell does not hesitate. He simply writes the exact instruction on his legal pad and tells me to consider it done. Next, I point to the Miami property documents. I instruct him to assemble a specialized litigation team to draft an emergency commercial eviction order for the penthouse unit. I explain that I am currently compiling a digital dossier proving their shell company was funded by wire fraud, grand larceny, and corporate embezzlement. The moment I transfer those files to the federal authorities, the forfeiture clause is triggered. I want the locks on that condo changed the second the police slap handcuffs on my husband. Attorney Caldwell leans forward, a sharp professional smile touching the corners of his mouth. He tells me Elias Sterling chose his successor perfectly. The documents will be drafted and ready for deployment on my exact command. He assures me that Sterling Holdings has an entire division of litigation attorneys who specialize in rapid asset seizure. Jamal and Brittany will not have a single legal avenue to fight the eviction. They will be removed from the property with nothing but the clothes on their backs. I stand up from the heavy leather chair, carefully adjusting Julian against my chest. He has been sleeping peacefully through the entire transfer of power, completely unaware that his mother just secured his safety and wealth for the rest of his life. The physical pain from my surgery is still a dull burn radiating across my lower abdomen, but it no longer feels paralyzing. The pain is just a reminder of what I survived to get here. I thank Attorney Caldwell and his legal team, promising to be in constant contact over the next few days through the secure, encrypted mobile device they provide me. Malik is waiting by the heavy boardroom doors, his imposing frame silent and watchful. Attorney Caldwell explains that Malik is not just a driver. He is a former private military contractor who handles executive protection for the Sterling estate, and he answers exclusively to me now. Malik escorts me back to the private executive elevator. The ride down to the underground parking garage is a stark contrast to my journey upward. When I stepped into this building, I was a destitute, betrayed woman looking for a lifeline. Stepping out, I am the chief executive officer of a $40 million empire, preparing to orchestrate the absolute destruction of every person who tried to bury me. Malik opens the heavy armored door of the Maybach, and I settle back into the plush leather seat. The interior of the car feels like a command center now. Malik slides behind the wheel and glances at me through the rearview mirror. He asks me where I would like to go next, his deep voice respectful and steady. I look out the tinted window at the bustling streets of downtown Atlanta. Any normal person who just inherited an empire would check into a five-star hotel, order room service, and never look back at the slums. But I am not a normal person. If I disappear into a luxury penthouse right now, Darlene and Tasha will simply twist the narrative to make themselves the victims. Jamal will keep spending my stolen money, feeling invincible in the Florida sun. I need them to feel untouchable so that when I finally pull the rug out from under them, the fall is absolute and devastating. I will go back and wash Tasha's cheap clothes. I will eat the cold leftovers Darlene throws down the stairs. I will smile and swallow their insults because every single second I endure their presence is another second I am tightening the legal snare around their throats. I look down at Julian kissing his soft forehead before meeting Malik's eyes in the mirror. "Take me back to the house, Malik," I say, my voice ringing with cold authority. "I am going back to the basement." Malik gives a single respectful nod, putting the massive vehicle into drive. The Maybach glides out of the parking garage and merges onto the highway, heading back toward the dilapidated neighborhood I just escaped. I pull my heavy winter coat tighter around Julian, hiding the encrypted corporate phone deep inside the pocket of my cheap diaper bag. I am returning to the damp, freezing concrete hole where my family thinks I am rotting away. They think they sent me to the bottom to break my spirit. They do not know I am walking back through their front door as the landlord who owns their entire existence, completely camouflaged in my new undeniable power. The transition from the pristine climate-controlled cabin of the Maybach back into the freezing damp air of the basement was jarring, but I did not let it show on my face. I walked past Darlene and Tasha, who were still standing frozen on the dead grass of the front lawn. They were completely speechless, staring at the retreating taillights of the multi-million-dollar limousine. I did not offer them a single word of explanation. I simply carried Julian down the rickety wooden stairs back into the concrete hole they had banished me to. I settled my son onto the sagging futon, wrapping him carefully in his blankets. My surgical scar was aching with a dull, heavy throb from the day's physical exertion, so I walked over to the utility sink in the dark corner of the basement to wash my face and take my medication. I deliberately left my cheap canvas diaper bag sitting wide open on the overturned plastic crate right under the single bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling. Protruding perfectly from the center compartment was the thick leather-bound legal folder bearing the gold-embossed crest of Sterling Holdings. I turned the rusted faucet, letting the cold water run over my hands, while keeping my eyes fixed on the reflection in the small cracked mirror above the sink. I did not have to wait long. Within 5 minutes, the floorboards above my head groaned. Soft, stealthy footsteps crept down the wooden stairs. Through the dim reflection, I watched Tasha slink into the basement. Her eyes were darting around nervously, looking for me in the shadows. When she thought the coast was clear, she moved straight toward the diaper bag. Tasha was inherently lazy, but her greed gave her a singular focus. She pulled the heavy leather folder from the bag. I watched her flip it open. Even from across the room, I could see her entire body stiffen. She was reading the executive summary page. It did not take a financial genius to understand the words $40 million valuation and sole executive beneficiary listed right next to my legal name. Tasha slapped a hand over her mouth, stifling a loud gasp. She shoved the folder back into the diaper bag, with trembling fingers spun around and sprinted silently back up the stairs. I dried my hands on a paper towel, allowing a slow, cold smile to stretch across my face. The bait was taken. The trap was officially set. For the next 3 hours, the house above me transformed. The usual sound of daytime television and constant bickering was replaced by the frantic noise of pots and pans clattering in the kitchen. The smell of smothered pork chops, candied yams, and baked macaroni and cheese began to waft down through the floorboards. It was the scent of a Sunday dinner feast being prepared on a random Tuesday afternoon. Darlene never cooked like this unless she was hosting the pastor or she wanted money. By 6 o'clock, the basement door swung wide open. Warm yellow light spilled down the concrete steps. "Kiara, my sweet, beautiful girl, dinner is ready." The voice drifting down the stairs was so coated in fake sugar it was almost nauseating. It was a tone Darlene had not used with me since I was a child. I picked up Julian, grabbed my diaper bag, and slowly ascended the stairs. I walked into the dining room, and the scene before me was a masterclass in manipulation. The good dining table, which was usually covered in unopened mail and Tasha's discarded beauty products, had been cleared and polished. Darlene had brought out the gold-rimmed china plates she guarded like family heirlooms. A massive feast was laid out perfectly. Tasha was sitting politely at the side of the table wearing a strained, desperate smile. Darlene rushed over to me, pulling out the heavy wooden chair at the absolute head of the table. Sit down, my precious, successful daughter." Darlene cooed, attempting to brush a stray lock of hair from my forehead. I dodged her hand, sitting in the chair while keeping Julian securely in my lap. "You must be absolutely exhausted." Darlene continued, piling a mountain of food onto my plate. working so hard taking care of my beautiful grandson. We are just so proud of you, Kiara. I stared at the steaming plate of pork chops. 2 hours ago, she had called me a stray dog and a disgrace to the family name. Now I was her precious, successful daughter. The whiplash would have been dizzying if I did not already know exactly what was driving it. You know, Kiara, Darlene said, taking her seat and leaning forward with a conspiratorial grin, family is the most important thing in the world. When the world turns its back on you, blood is all you have. I always knew you were destined for greatness. I told Tasha just the other day, I said Kiara is going to be the one to lift this entire family up. Tasha nodded vigorously, tapping her acrylic nails against her water glass. Oh, absolutely. We are so happy for you, Kiara. We really are. I did not touch the fork. I looked back and forth between the two of them, my face a completely blank slate. Get to the point, Darlene, I said, my voice low and devoid of any emotion. Darlene chuckled nervously, adjusting her silk robe. Well, since we are being honest, Tasha happened to see some very impressive legal documents in your bag. We know about the old man at the bus station. We know about the trust fund, Kiara. We know God has blessed you with a massive inheritance. She paused, folding her hands together on the table. And since you have come into such a monumental blessing, we think it is only fair that you pay the family tax. The family tax, I repeated, tasting the sheer audacity of the words. Exactly, Tasha blurted out, leaning over the table, her eyes wide with unadulterated greed. I need $80,000, Kiara. My credit cards are completely maxed out. You know how hard I tried to launch my acting career and my boutique. I had to buy the right designer bags and take the right trips to build my brand. It is an investment, but the banks are threatening to sue me. 80,000 is basically pennies to you now. You will not even notice it is gone. And my transmission is failing, Darlene chimed in, seamlessly picking up the extortion pitch. I cannot be driving around Atlanta in a broken-down sedan. Not when my daughter is a multi-millionaire CEO. It looks bad for our brand. I need a fully loaded Mercedes SUV, black on black. Plus, we think a baseline gift of $200,000 in cash for my retirement is fair. Fair? I asked, raising an eyebrow. It is the absolute minimum you owe me. Darlene snapped, her fake sweet tone beginning to crack under the weight of her entitlement. I gave you life, Kiara. I raised you. And when your husband threw you out on the street with a newborn baby who took you in, who gave you a roof over your head, I let you stay in my house when you had nothing. You owe me this. You owe this family. Owe this. I looked at the feast spread out before me. I thought about the $12 Tasha had stolen from my diaper bag while my baby was crying from hunger. I thought about the freezing concrete basement where Darlene had banished me, forcing me to eat cold leftovers off a paper plate while my C-section wound bled through my clothes. They truly believed that a plate of pork chops and a fake smile could erase decades of emotional abuse and 2 weeks of absolute torture. I slowly pushed the gold-rimmed plate away from me. The screech of the ceramic sliding across the wooden table echoed loudly in the quiet dining room. I looked Tasha in the eye, and then I shifted my gaze directly to Darlene, locking onto her pupils with the cold, calculating focus of a forensic auditor identifying a fraudulent debt. No, I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried the lethal weight of an executioner's axe. Darlene blinked, her false smile freezing on her face. Excuse me. I said no, I repeated, leaning forward slightly. I am not paying your credit card debt, Tasha. You bought luxury clothes to impress strangers on the internet while I was working 80-hour weeks to build a life. And Darlene, I am not buying you a Mercedes. I am not giving you a retirement fund. I am not giving you a single dime of my money. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever, not. The silence that hit the dining room was heavy and violent. Darlene's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. The sweet, motherly facade she had worn for the last 10 minutes completely shattered, disintegrating into a million jagged pieces. Her lip curled upward, revealing her teeth in a snarl of pure, unadulterated hatred. You selfish, ungrateful little brat! Darlene hissed, slamming her fists down on the dining table so hard the crystal glasses rattled. You think because you got lucky with some dead old man's money you can sit in my house and disrespect me? I will take you to court. I will sue you for grandparents' rights. I will tell the entire world what a rotten daughter you are." I watched her rage boil over, feeling absolutely nothing but cold satisfaction. "Let the vultures scream," I thought, holding my sleeping son against my chest. They were demanding a ransom for the roof over my head, completely unaware that I had the eviction notice for this very property sitting safely inside my bag. The morning sun filtering through the grime of the basement window did nothing to warm the freezing concrete, but my blood was running hot enough to keep both me and my son perfectly comfortable. Darlene had spent the entire night storming around the house above me, slamming cabinet doors and loudly complaining on the phone to anyone who would listen about her ungrateful billionaire daughter. She had no idea that her temper tantrum was merely the opening act of a much larger circus. Word travels with terrifying speed when money is involved. Tasha, with her insatiable need for attention and her complete inability to keep a secret, had practically broadcasted my financial status to the entire eastern seaboard. She had spent the evening furiously texting every contact in her phone, trying to leverage her proximity to my new wealth. I knew it was only a matter of time before that information reached Miami. I just did not expect the vultures to descend before I even had my morning coffee. A sharp, entitled pounding echoed through the floorboards directly above my head. It was not the polite knock of a mail carrier. It was the aggressive, demanding strike of someone who believed they owned whatever was on the other side of the door. I carefully placed Julian in his portable bassinet, making sure he was swaddled tightly in his blankets. I checked the hidden compartment of my diaper bag to ensure my encrypted laptop and the Sterling Holdings legal folders were completely secure. I slung the bag over my shoulder and walked up the rickety wooden stairs, pushing the basement door open just as Darlene unlatched the front door. Standing on the porch looking like he had just stepped out of a luxury car commercial was Jamal. He was wearing a tailored linen suit that I had paid for with my last corporate bonus. Clinging tightly to his left arm was Brittany. Terrence's white wife stood there shivering slightly in the crisp Atlanta morning air, trying to look effortlessly chic in a designer trench coat. But what made the air completely leave my lungs was the piece of jewelry resting against her collarbone. Brittany was wearing my custom diamond pendant necklace. It was a flawless 2-carat teardrop diamond suspended on a platinum chain. I had bought that necklace for myself to celebrate passing my forensic accounting certification exams. I had searched my empty house for it the day Jamal left, hoping to sell it for emergency cash, only to realize he had stripped my jewelry box bare. Seeing it draped around the neck of the woman who was sleeping with my husband, while my brother-in-law broke his back on construction sites, filled me with a rage so pure it tasted like ash in my mouth. Jamal pushed his way past Darlene, stepping into the cramped living room without waiting for an invitation. He looked around the shabby interior with a blatant sneer of disgust before his eyes locked onto me. He did not look at the heavy dark circles under my eyes. He did not ask about the grueling C-section recovery he had abandoned me to endure. He did not even glance toward the basement door where his newborn son was sleeping. "Kiara," Jamal said, his voice dripping with an offensive, forced calmness. "We need to have a serious conversation. Put the emotions aside and let us talk business like adults." I stood at the top of the basement stairs, keeping my posture rigidly straight despite the agonizing pull of my surgical stitches. "You break into my home, forge my signature on a deed, drain my bank accounts, and leave me and your 5-day-old son to freeze on the street," I said, my voice dangerously level. "And you walk into my mother's house wearing my money on your back, demanding to talk business." Brittany let out a soft, mocking sigh, stepping further into the living room and resting her hand protectively over my diamond necklace. "Oh, please, Kiara, do not do the whole hysterical, bitter wife routine. It is so exhausting. Jamal and I have a real connection. We are building a life together in Miami, and we do not have time for your unnecessary drama. You need to look at the bigger picture here." I shifted my gaze to Brittany, scanning her up and down with the clinical detachment of an auditor examining a forged receipt. "I am looking at the bigger picture, Brittany. I am looking at a woman who is wearing stolen property while legally married to a man she is currently betraying. You are standing in a house you do not own, demanding respect you have not earned." Jamal held up his hands, acting like the voice of reason in a boardroom negotiation. Enough. We are not here to rehash the past. My phone blew up last night. People are talking Kiara. They are saying you scammed your way into some massive trust fund from a dead billionaire. $40 million is the number going around. Now I know you are a smart woman, but you and I both know you cannot handle that kind of corporate pressure alone. He actually adjusted his suit jacket, puffing out his chest. I am willing to step in and help you manage the portfolio. We can be civil about this. The sheer blinding audacity of his proposition was almost hypnotic. He had literally left me for dead, and now he was offering to manage the empire I had just inherited as a favor to me. Before I could verbally dissect his staggering delusion, the front door opened wider. A short, balding man clutching a scuffed leather briefcase squeezed past Jamal and stepped into the living room. He wore a cheap, shiny suit and had the desperate, hungry look of a personal injury lawyer who chased ambulances for a living. "This is my legal counsel, Mr. Vance," Jamal announced, gesturing to the balding man. "Since you want to be hostile, we can do this the hard way." The sleazy lawyer did not waste a single second. He unlatched his briefcase right there on Darlene's faded floral sofa and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He slapped the paperwork down onto the coffee table with a loud, dramatic thud. Mrs. Washington, the lawyer, began, his voice slick and incredibly fast. "My client, Mr. Jamal Washington, is officially initiating a claim on the assets recently acquired under your name. Since neither party has formally filed for a dissolution of marriage within the state, you are still legally bound in matrimony. Therefore, any assets, inheritances, or corporate entities acquired by either party during this period are subject to the laws of equitable distribution. My client is legally entitled to 50% of the Sterling Trust and all affiliated real estate holdings. We are serving you with formal notice of our intent to freeze those assets until a judge grants my client his rightful half of the $40 million. I stared at the paperwork resting on the coffee table. They had flown from Miami to Atlanta in the middle of the night, hired a bottom-feeding attorney, and drafted a frivolous lawsuit, all because Jamal believed the legal system would validate his greed. He honestly believed that because I had not rushed to the courthouse to file divorce papers while I was bleeding and destitute, he had secured a golden ticket to half of my newly acquired empire. "You cannot be serious," I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat. "You abandoned your newborn son. You committed real estate fraud. And you think a judge is going to hand you $20 million because of a technicality in the filing timeline." The lawyer smiled, a greasy, confident grin showing a row of crooked teeth. "The law is the law, Mrs. Washington. Marital assets are marital assets. The court does not care about your feelings. My client has a rock-solid claim to half of that trust fund. You can either sign a settlement agreement right now, transferring $20 million into his account, or we will drag you through a brutal public litigation process that will tie up your money for the next decade." I watched Jamal wrap his arm around Brittany's waist, pulling her close. They looked so incredibly smug, standing in the middle of a dilapidated living room, convinced they had just executed the perfect legal ambush. But they were not the only vultures in the room. Darlene, who had been standing silently near the kitchen doorway, watching the entire exchange, suddenly moved. She walked slowly across the faded carpet, her eyes fixed on the thick stack of legal documents resting on the coffee table. Tasha followed closely behind her mother, matching her predatory stride. I expected Darlene to finally act like a mother. I expected her to throw Jamal out of her house for disrespecting her daughter and abandoning her grandson. Instead, Darlene walked right past me. She crossed the room and stood directly behind Jamal and Brittany, aligning herself perfectly with the man who had ruined my life. Tasha stepped up right next to her, crossing her arms and glaring at me with raw, unfiltered jealousy. "You know, Jamal," Darlene said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet negotiation tone, "a brutal public litigation process sounds very messy. But it would be a lot easier for you to win that $20 million if you had character witnesses. Witnesses who could testify about Kiara's state of mind." I felt the air turn to ice in my lungs. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me, watching her strike a deal with the devil in real time. Darlene smiled at Jamal, her eyes gleaming with absolute malicious greed. "I have been watching her for 2 weeks, Jamal. Kiara is completely unstable. She is obsessed with her laptop. She barely sleeps. She keeps that poor baby locked in a freezing, damp basement because she is unfit to be a mother. If you need someone to stand up in front of a judge and testify that Kiara is a danger to her child and completely incompetent to manage a $40 million trust fund, well, Tasha and I are more than willing to swear to that in a court of law. Tasha nodded enthusiastically, pulling out her phone. Absolutely. I will tell the judge she attacked me. I will say whatever you need me to say, Jamal. We will help you take the baby and the money. Darlene stepped closer to Jamal, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, but keeping it loud enough for me to hear every single word. Of course, testifying in court takes a lot of time and energy, Darlene purred. If we help you secure your $20 million and full custody of the boy, we would expect a generous consultation fee. Say 10% of your settlement. $2 million sounds like a fair price for a mother's honest testimony, do you not agree? They had drawn the battle lines. My husband, my mother, and my sister were standing in a united front, actively conspiring to steal my child and my fortune. They were ready to lie under oath to paint me as an unfit mother and institutionalize me just to get their hands on Elias Sterling's money. They looked at me waiting for the breakdown. They wanted me to scream, to beg, to fall to my knees and surrender. Instead, I reached into my diaper bag and pulled out my laptop. I set it down right next to their frivolous lawsuit on the coffee table. I did not shed a single tear. I looked directly at Jamal's sleazy lawyer and let a cold, dangerous smile spread across my face, revealing the absolute predator they had just awakened. The physical intimidation began exactly as they had planned it. Jamal took 2 large steps forward, closing the physical distance between us until he was standing practically on top of me. The cheap cologne he always overused burned my nostrils. Brittany mirrored his movement, stepping right up to my left side. They were deliberately trying to box me into the corner of the living room, using their physical presence to intimidate a woman who had undergone major abdominal surgery less than 3 weeks ago. My surgical scar throbbed with a sharp warning, but I planted my feet firmly on the faded carpet, refusing to surrender a single inch of ground. Brittany leaned in so close I could smell the mint gum she was chewing. She looked down at my simple clothes and then let her eyes trace the outline of the cheap plastic crate I had been using as a chair in the basement. You really need to accept reality, Kiara, she sneered, her voice dripping with pure condescension. You are just a bitter, dumped wife who cannot handle that her husband upgraded. We have the law on our side. Jamal is the legal spouse and he has every right to that trust fund. If you do not sign this settlement agreement right now, we are not just going to drain your accounts in court. We are going to make sure you lose the one thing you actually have left. Jamal pulled his smartphone from his tailored jacket pocket, tapping the screen to unlock it. He held it up, dangling it directly in front of my face. I have the number for Georgia Child Protective Services dialed in and ready to go. Kiara, he threatened, his voice low and vicious. Look at this place. Look at you. You are living in a freezing, damp basement with a newborn baby. You have no income, no permanent address, and according to your own mother and sister, you are completely mentally unstable. The state will take Julian away before the sun goes down. They will place him in foster care, and once I secure my $20 million from your little trust fund, Brittany and I will file for full permanent custody. We can give him a stable, wealthy 2-parent household. You will never see your son again. The sheer depravity of his threat hung in the stifling air of the living room. He was holding my infant son hostage, using the threat of the foster care system to extort $20 million from me. Tasha clapped her hands together from the other side of the room, cheering him on. Darlene nodded vigorously, crossing her arms over her chest, acting as if handing her own grandson over to a hostile state system was a perfectly reasonable business tactic. Sign the paper, Mrs. Washington, the sleazy lawyer chimed in, tapping a cheap ballpoint pen against the settlement document on the coffee table. Save yourself the heartbreak. Take the remaining $20 million and walk away quietly. It is the best deal you are going to get. Jamal laughed, a booming, arrogant sound that rattled against the peeling wallpaper. He was riding a high of absolute narcissistic delusion, convinced he had orchestrated the perfect checkmate. You always thought you were the smartest person in the room, Kiara, Jamal mocked, shaking his head. You spent our entire marriage looking down your nose at me, treating me like I was financially illiterate just because I did not have your fancy forensic accounting certifications. But look who outsmarted who. I packed up your entire life in 5 days. I sold your precious house right out from under you and walked away with a briefcase full of cash while you were stuck in a hospital bed. I am untouchable. He was pacing now, high on his own perceived brilliance, completely incapable of keeping his mouth shut. I did not even have to work hard to take your house, he bragged, gesturing wildly toward Darlene. You think you are so secure, but you have blind spots everywhere, Kiara. I needed a verified notary seal to forge your signature on that warranty deed, and I did not even have to leave the neighborhood to get it. Your own mother handed me the notary stamp. The entire living room went completely dead silent. Even Brittany looked surprised, stepping back slightly from Jamal. The sleazy lawyer froze the pen, hovering awkwardly over the settlement document. I slowly turned my head and locked eyes with Darlene. Her face had instantly drained of all color, turning an ashy, terrifying gray. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Jamal, oblivious to the legal grenade he had just detonated, kept right on talking. That is right, Kiara, he laughed, pointing a finger at Darlene. Your loving mother agreed to stamp the fraudulent deed and swear she witnessed your signature. All I had to do was promise her a 20% cut of the home equity once the wire transfer cleared. She sold you out for a payout. Do you understand now? You have no allies. You have no safe harbor. Nobody in this room is on your side. The final puzzle piece slammed into place with sickening, devastating clarity. I had spent weeks wondering how Jamal managed to secure a verified notary stamp to bypass the strict real estate fraud protocols. Darlene worked as a licensed notary public at her day job as a grocery store customer service manager. My own mother, the woman whose blood ran in my veins, had legally facilitated the theft of my home. She had stamped the forged document knowingly, leaving her daughter and her newborn grandson homeless, all because Jamal promised her a cut of the stolen equity. A cut he never even paid her because he wired the entire sum to an offshore account the moment it cleared. Darlene began to stammer, taking a step backward as she realized the magnitude of what Jamal had just confessed in front of multiple witnesses, including a lawyer. Jamal, you promised you would never say anything about that, Darlene shrieked, panic finally cracking her voice. You said it would stay between us. You never even gave me the money. Shut up, Darlene, Jamal snapped, waving her off like a pesky insect. It does not matter now anyway. We are all getting paid today. They looked at me, waiting for the inevitable breakdown. They expected the tears to fall. They expected the screams of a broken, betrayed woman realizing that her husband and her mother had conspired to destroy her life. They expected me to fall to my knees, grab the cheap ballpoint pen, and sign away $20 million just to keep my baby out of the hands of the state. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not move a single muscle in panic or despair. The emotional part of my brain, the part that felt pain and betrayal and sorrow, completely detached. It shut down entirely, leaving nothing but the cold, calculating, hyper-focused processor of a senior forensic auditor. I looked at the people standing in this room, and I no longer saw family. I saw liabilities. I saw fraudulent entities. I saw targets. I reached down and placed my hand on the sleek aluminum cover of my laptop, resting on the coffee table. I flipped the screen open. The device powered on instantly, the harsh blue light washing over my face. The glowing screen reflected in the oversized sunglasses Brittany had perched on top of her head. I typed in my decryption password with steady, rhythmic keystrokes. I ignored Darlene, who was hyperventilating in the corner. I ignored Tasha, who was looking back and forth between everyone in sheer confusion. I ignored Jamal and Brittany standing aggressively in my personal space. Instead, I fixed my gaze entirely on Mr. Vance, the fast-talking, bottom-feeding attorney who had drafted this ridiculous lawsuit. Lawyers are risk-averse creatures. They only bark loudly when they believe they are holding the winning hand. When faced with catastrophic liability, they are the first to abandon ship. I looked directly into his greedy, shifting eyes and allowed a slow, razor-sharp smile to spread across my face. It was not a smile of defeat. It was the smile of an apex predator watching its prey walk willingly into a steel trap. "Are you absolutely sure you want to invoke marital asset laws today, Mr. Vance?" I asked, my voice echoing with chilling authority. "Because as a legal professional, I am sure you are well aware that the discovery process works both ways, Jamal." Mr. Vance blinked, the greasy confidence melting right off his face. I did not wait for his legal rebuttal or his fast-talking threats. I reached into the hidden compartment of my bag and pulled out a thick, bound stack of printed financial records. I tossed it onto the coffee table. The heavy thud of the paper hitting the glass drowned out the sound of Darlene breathing heavily in the corner. "What is this?" Mr. Vance asked, his voice losing its arrogant rhythm. He looked down at the neatly indexed pages but did not reach out to touch them. "That is the sound of your client's financial guillotine dropping," I said smoothly. I leaned forward and tapped the top page with my index finger. "You see, Mr. Vance, when Jamal decided to steal my home equity and lock me out in the cold, he made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed my grief and physical vulnerability would paralyze my intellect. But I am a senior forensic auditor. I do not cry over missing money. I hunt it down." I looked at Jamal, whose chest was suddenly rising and falling in rapid, panicked breaths. "Did you really think I would not trace the wire transfer from the house sale, Jamal? You routed it through a Delaware shell company you creatively named JB Holdings, but the stolen equity from my house was just the cherry on top of your criminal sundae. It was the final cash grab before you ran. The real story, the one that is going to put you in a federal penitentiary, was in the transaction ledger for the past 24 months. Brittany shifted uncomfortably, her hand dropping away from my stolen diamond necklace. She looked at Jamal, seeking reassurance, but Jamal was staring at the thick stack of papers like it was a venomous snake ready to strike. I opened the folder to the second section, flipping the pages so the lawyer could see the highlighted columns of data. Page 12. "Mr. Vance, look closely. JB Holdings was receiving recurring deposits of $10,000 to $20,000 every single month long before my house was fraudulently sold. Now Jamal is a mid-level financial manager. His legitimate salary could never support those cash injections." Vance leaned over, adjusting his glasses. His eyes darted across the ledger, his legal mind quickly processing the catastrophic implications of the numbers. "Where did these funds originate?" He asked, the question slipping out before he could stop himself. "Apex Construction." I announced the name, ringing out loud and clear in the cramped living room. Brittany gasped out loud, taking a sudden, staggering step backward. Jamal lunged forward, trying to snatch the folder off the table, but I slammed my hand down flat on top of the pages, holding them firmly in place. "Do not touch my property, Jamal," I warned, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The police tend to frown upon tampering with federal evidence." I kept my hand on those documents, turning my attention back to the lawyer. "Apex Construction is owned by Terrence Washington, Jamal's older brother, Brittany's legal husband. Terrence trusted his educated brother to handle his company payroll and vendor accounts to save money on corporate bookkeepers. Jamal repaid that absolute trust by setting up an elaborate network of phantom vendors, fake drywall suppliers, ghost logistics companies, non-existent consulting firms." I flipped to a page filled with IP address logs and banking routing numbers. I pulled the tax filings for Apex Construction and cross-referenced them with the vendor payment logs flowing directly into JB Holdings. Jamal generated fraudulent invoices, approved them himself, and wired his brother's hard-earned profits directly into a secret offshore account. He systematically embezzled $1.2 million over the course of 2 years. I stood up, smoothing the front of my clothes, towering over the coffee table. I pointed directly at Brittany, who was now trembling visibly, her designer trench coat looking utterly ridiculous in the face of her impending ruin. "And he did it to fund her." I matched the exact dates of the largest embezzled wire transfers to the exact dates Brittany posted photos on social media, flaunting luxury vacations to Dubai and brand new diamond tennis bracelets. While Terrence was working 14-hour shifts pouring concrete in the Georgia summer heat, his wife and his brother were draining his life savings to play pretend billionaires in Miami. The silence in Darlene's living room was absolute and suffocating. Darlene and Tasha, who just moments ago were eager to testify against me in court for a 10% cut of the settlement, were completely paralyzed. The $20 million they thought Jamal had secured was evaporating before their eyes, replaced by the looming shadow of federal prison. Tasha backed away from Jamal, wiping her hands on her velour tracksuit, as if his proximity might infect her with his crimes. Mr. Vance, the sleazy attorney who had been practically salivating over a lucrative settlement, suddenly understood the catastrophic liability standing next to him. He was a bottom feeder, but he was not an idiot. You do not invoke marital asset laws when the assets in question are the direct result of $1 million corporate embezzlement scheme. Doing so would make him an accessory after the fact to wire fraud and grand larceny. Vance physically recoiled from Jamal. He grabbed the frivolous lawsuit he had just slapped on the table and hastily shoved it back into his scuffed leather briefcase. The metallic snap of his briefcase closing sounded like a final judgment echoing through the tense room. "Mr. Vance, what are you doing?" Jamal stammered, panic finally cracking his arrogant facade. "You are my lawyer. Tell her she cannot use these documents. Tell her it is illegal hacking. You have to shut her down." "I cannot represent you in this matter, Mr. Washington," Vance said, his voice sharp and panicked. He did not even look at Jamal. He kept his eyes locked on his briefcase, securing the latches with trembling hands. "My firm does not handle federal wire fraud or corporate embezzlement defense. I came here for a standard divorce asset division. Our retainer agreement is null and void, effective immediately. Do not contact my office again." "You cannot just leave!" Brittany shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical frequency. She grabbed Jamal's arm, shaking it frantically. "She is lying. Kiara is just a jealous, crazy ex-wife making up spreadsheets to scare us. Jamal, tell him she is lying. Tell him we earned that money." Jamal tried to rally, puffing out his chest and pointing a shaking finger at me. His face was dripping with sweat, staining the collar of his expensive linen shirt. "It is garbage. All of it. You fabricated those digital logs, Kiara, because you are bitter I upgraded. No judge is going to look at a homemade audit printed in a damp basement and send me to jail based on your bitter vendetta. I will sue you for defamation." I looked at the man I had once vowed to spend my life with. The confident predator who had walked through the front door 10 minutes ago demanding $20 million was entirely gone. In his place stood a pathetic, desperate thief, completely out of moves and running out of breath. "You are right about one thing, Jamal," I said, my voice perfectly calm, cutting through his frantic shouting. "A judge will want official verification. A judge will want subpoenas and bank records, and a formal federal investigation. The legal system moves incredibly slow." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my encrypted mobile device. The screen was already unlocked, displaying a secure email delivery confirmation tracking receipt. "But I do not need a judge to believe me today, Jamal. I do not need the courts to validate my audit right this second. I just needed the primary victim to see the math." I tapped a single button on my phone, sending a text message containing one word. "Now." "What did you just do?" Darlene whispered from the corner of the room, her voice trembling with sudden terror. She knew me well enough to recognize that tone. She knew I had just dropped the final match on the gasoline. The answer did not come from me. It came from the front porch. Heavy, rapid footsteps pounded up the wooden stairs, shaking the entire frame of the house. Before Darlene could even move toward the entryway, the front door was violently shoved open. The heavy wood slammed against the interior wall with a deafening crash, knocking a framed family picture off the hallway table. Glass shattered across the floorboards. Terrence walked into the living room. He was wearing his heavy steel-toed work boots and his dust-covered construction jeans. His high-visibility work shirt was stained with sweat and dirt. In his massive calloused hand, he was gripping the exact same thick-printed forensic audit I had placed on the coffee table. I had securely emailed the entire dossier to him an hour before Jamal and Brittany even arrived at the house, telling him to print it, read the highlighted pages, and meet me here immediately. Terrence stepped fully into the room, blocking the only exit. His massive frame seemed to suck all the remaining oxygen out of the space. He did not look at Darlene. He did not look at Tasha. He did not even look at me. His eyes bloodshot and burning with a level of pure, unadulterated rage that makes men do unspeakable things were locked entirely on his brother and his wife. I sat in the center of Darlene's living room holding the unyielding calm of a woman who had already won the war. The physical intimidation Jamal had attempted moments before was nothing compared to the absolute devastation about to unfold. Terrence stood in the entryway looking like a force of nature that had just been unleashed. He was still wearing his heavy, steel-toed work boots and his dust-covered construction jeans. His high-visibility work shirt was stained with the sweat of a man who had been up since dawn, pouring concrete to build a future for a wife who was actively destroying it. In his massive, calloused hand, he gripped the printed forensic audit I had securely emailed to him an hour before Jamal and Brittany even arrived at the house. He did not look at my mother, Darlene. He did not look at my sister, Tasha. He did not even look at me. His bloodshot eyes were locked entirely on his brother and his wife. Brittany was the first to break the suffocating silence. She let out a high-pitched, nervous gasp and took a step toward Terrence, reaching her hand out in a pathetic display of fake innocence. "Terrence, baby," she stammered, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here? Kiara is just making things up. She is jealous because Jamal and I fell in love. You cannot believe these spreadsheets." Terrence did not yell. He did not raise his hand. He simply reached into the back pocket of his work jeans, pulled out a folded stack of legal documents, and threw them directly at her chest. The papers hit Brittany and fluttered to the floor, scattering across Darlene's faded carpet. "Sign them," Terrence said, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that shook the walls. "I filed them 20 minutes after Kiara sent me the audit. I called my lawyer from the job site. You have exactly 24 hours to get your cheap designer bags out of my house before I drag them into the street and set them on fire." Brittany stared at the divorce papers on the floor, her jaw trembling as the reality of her situation finally breached her arrogant delusions. She looked at Jamal, expecting him to defend her, to step up and act like the wealthy savior he had pretended to be. But Jamal was shrinking. The confident predator who had swaggered into this house demanding $20 million was completely paralyzed under the weight of his older brother's stare. Terrence stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "Jamal, you are my own blood," Terrence said, the heartbreak bleeding through his rage. "I carried you when we were kids. I paid for your college application fees. I gave you the keys to my company because I wanted us to build wealth together. And you used my company as a personal piggy bank to sleep with my wife." Jamal held up his hands, palms facing outward in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Terrence, listen to me, man," he pleaded, backing away until he bumped into the coffee table. "The numbers are just moved around. It is a temporary liquidity transfer. I was going to put the money back. I swear to you, I was just investing it in real estate to double our profits. We can fix this." Terrence pulled his cell phone from his shirt pocket. "We are not fixing anything, Jamal. I am fixing it." He dialed 3 digits and put the phone on speaker, holding it up for the entire room to hear. The emergency operator answered immediately, asking for his location and the nature of his emergency. "My name is Terrence Washington," he stated clearly, his eyes never leaving his brother's face. "I am the owner of Apex Construction, and I am reporting a $1.2 million corporate embezzlement scheme. The perpetrator is standing right in front of me, and I have the full forensic audit in my hand. I need officers dispatched immediately." Jamal let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Brittany dropped to her knees, scrambling to gather the divorce papers, her tears ruining her expensive makeup. The greasy lawyer, Mr. Vance, who had been desperately trying to secure the latches on his briefcase, suddenly found his voice. He realized that if Jamal was going to federal prison, his own legal fees were never going to be paid. He puffed out his chest, trying to salvage any shred of leverage he could find. "Hold on just a minute," Mr. Vance interjected, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You can call the police about the corporate funds, but the residential real estate transaction is completely separate. My client still sold the marital home. The buyers have the keys. The deed is filed with the county clerk. You can show off all the spreadsheets you want, Mrs. Washington, but that house is legally sold, and my client is walking away with that equity. The law protects the recorded deed." I looked at the attorney with a mix of pity and absolute disgust. He really thought he could outmaneuver a senior forensic auditor on a real estate technicality. I reached into the front pocket of my diaper bag and pulled out a small silver flash drive. I tossed it onto the coffee table right next to his briefcase. It landed with a sharp, metallic clink. You really should verify your client's paperwork before you try to practice law in my presence, Mr. Vance, I said, keeping my voice razor sharp. A recorded deed is only protected by the law if the notarization is valid. I tracked down the notary stamp Jamal used on the closing documents. The signature belongs to a man named David Carter. Darlene let out a sharp gasp from the corner of the room, her hands flying to cover her mouth. She knew exactly who David Carter was. I kept my eyes locked on the lawyer. David Carter is my mother's boyfriend. He is also a convicted felon who served 3 years for check fraud. Because of his felony conviction, the state of Georgia permanently revoked his notary license 4 years ago. He bought a fake stamp online to help Darlene and Jamal push this fraudulent sale through the title company. I leaned forward, resting my hands on my laptop. Because the notary was operating illegally and committing a felony by stamping that document, the sale of my house is legally void ab initio. It means the transaction never happened in the eyes of the law. The deed transfer is completely invalid. The buyers who gave Jamal that cash are going to sue him for every penny, and the title insurance company is going to file federal fraud charges. Jamal does not have the equity. He has a mountain of criminal liability. Mr. Vance stopped breathing. He looked at Jamal, who was now sweating profusely, shaking his head in a silent panic. The lawyer grabbed his briefcase, turned on his heel, and sprinted for the front door, not saying another word, as he abandoned his client to the wolves. I turned my attention back to my laptop. The screen was still glowing, displaying the securely encrypted data package containing the entire forensic audit. The wire transfer receipts, the fake vendor invoices, the IP login logs, the fraudulent deed documents, and the offshore account routing numbers. It was a perfectly wrapped gift for the federal government. I am not going to let you drag this out in civil court, Jamal, I said, resting my finger over the enter key. I am not going to let you hide behind sleazy lawyers or fake apologies. You tried to take my son. You tried to take my home. Now I am taking your freedom. Jamal lunged forward, a desperate primal scream ripping from his throat as he tried to grab my laptop. Terrence intercepted him mid-stride. Terrence grabbed his brother by the lapels of his expensive linen suit and slammed him hard against the living room wall. The drywall cracked under the impact. Terrence pinned him there, his massive forearm pressing against Jamal's chest, holding him completely immobilized. "Send it," Terrence commanded, looking over his shoulder at me. "Send every single page." I pressed the enter key. The progress bar flashed across my screen, bright green and moving with lethal speed. The data package was simultaneously transmitting to the Federal Bureau of Investigation Field Office, the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Division, and the local police department fraud unit. The words "transmission complete" popped up on my screen. The digital guillotine had officially dropped. Jamal slumped against the wall, weeping openly as Terrence held him in place. Brittany was sobbing on the floor, clutching her divorce papers. The absolute destruction of their arrogant fantasy was complete. But the war in the living room was not over. Darlene, who had been backed into the corner watching her golden boy son-in-law get dismantled piece by piece, finally snapped. Her 20% cut of my stolen equity was gone. The $2 million extortion fee she planned to extract from Jamal was gone. Her boyfriend David was about to be investigated for felony fraud. Everything she had plotted had turned to dust in a matter of minutes. She stomped across the living room, her face twisted into a mask of pure demonic rage. She pointed a shaking acrylic nail inches from my face. "Stop it!" she screamed, her voice tearing through the room like a siren. "Stop destroying this family right now, Kiara. You think you are so smart, hitting buttons on a computer and ruining lives? You think you can just come into my house and send people to prison?" I looked up at the woman who gave birth to me, completely unfazed by her hysterical screaming. "You destroyed this family, Darlene," I replied calmly. "You sold your own daughter out for a payout you never even got." "I do not care," Darlene shrieked, spit flying from her lips. "This is my house and I make the rules. I will not have a vindictive, cold-hearted snake sitting in my living room acting like she is God. Get up. Get up right now." She stepped closer, threatening to grab my laptop. "Pack up your miserable crying baby and get out of my sight. I want you out of my house this exact second. You are going to take your bags and you are going to walk out that front door and freeze on the street. I am throwing you out, Kiara, and I do not care if you starve in the gutter." Tasha stepped up right next to her mother, nodding aggressively, puffing out her chest. "You heard her," Tasha yelled. "Get out of our house before we physically drag you out." I slowly closed my laptop. I did not rush. I did not panic. I calmly placed the computer into the protective sleeve of my diaper bag. I looked at the furious, desperate faces of my mother and sister, who genuinely believed they still held the ultimate power over my survival because they controlled the roof over my head. They were about to learn the hardest lesson of their miserable lives. I secured the zipper on my diaper bag and let the heavy silence hang in the room for a long, deliberate moment. Darlene was still pointing her shaking acrylic nail toward the front door, her chest heaving with exertion from her hysterical screaming. Tasha stood right beside her, puffing out her chest, wrapped in that cheap velour tracksuit, fully convinced that she was the intimidating enforcer of this household. They truly believed that because they held the keys to this dilapidated house, they controlled my entire destiny. They thought they could banish me to the freezing streets with my newborn son and return to their delusional lives of unearned luxury. I looked at Darlene, feeling absolutely zero maternal connection to the woman standing before me. "You are incredibly quick to throw people out onto the street, Darlene," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You are so eager to remind everyone that this is your house and you make the rules, but you seem to have a severe lapse in your financial memory." Darlene narrowed her eyes, her pointing hand dropping slightly. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "I own this property. I have lived here for 20 years. You lived here for 20 years, I corrected, taking a slow, measured step toward her. But you stopped owning this property the moment you treated it like a bottomless ATM to fund your favorite daughter's delusions." I reached into the secondary compartment of my diaper bag and pulled out the thick red legal folder I had brought directly from the boardroom of Sterling Holdings. The heavy cardstock felt like a weapon in my hands. I flipped it open, pulling out the authenticated corporate documents bearing the gold-embossed seal of the holding company. I held the documents up so Darlene could see the bold black text. "2 years ago, you took out a massive secondary equity loan against this property, Darlene. You did not use that money to fix the leaking roof or replace the broken furnace. You took out a $90,000 high-interest loan to pay for Tasha's fake influencer career. You bought her designer clothes, paid for luxury photo shoots, and funded her ridiculous lifestyle, all because she convinced you she was going to be a star and buy you a mansion." Tasha flinched, taking a small step backward, as I exposed her massive financial failure. Darlene swallowed hard, the color beginning to drain from her face as she recognized the official bank letterhead in my hand. But Tasha did not become a star. I continued, my voice echoing in the tense living room. She just became a 28-year-old woman with no job and no prospects. And when the money ran out, Darlene, you completely stopped paying the mortgage. You have been in default for over 4 months. The original bank washed their hands of your bad debt and sold it to a commercial collection agency. That agency was then acquired by a massive real estate holding firm. I took another step forward, closing the distance between us. The air in the room grew suffocatingly tight. That holding firm is a direct subsidiary of Sterling Holdings. And yesterday afternoon, Elias Sterling amended his living trust and transferred complete executive control of Sterling Holdings to me. Darlene stopped breathing entirely. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers, darting from the documents in my hand to my completely expressionless face. "I am not just your daughter anymore, Darlene," I stated, dropping the heavy anchor of reality right onto her chest. "I am the chief executive officer of the corporation that owns your debt. You do not own this house. I own the paper on this house. I own the roof over your head and the ground beneath your feet." "You are lying," Darlene gasped, her voice cracking into a high-pitched whisper. "You cannot do this. You cannot take my home." "I did not take it, Darlene. You surrendered it when you stopped paying your bills. I just bought the receipts." I pulled a crisp, white envelope from the back of the folder and held it out to her. "This is a formal legal notice of eviction and foreclosure. The legal team at Sterling Holdings drafted it this morning. It is completely airtight and filed with the county clerk. You have exactly 30 days to pack up your cheap air fresheners, your fake designer bags, and your overwhelming sense of entitlement and vacate my property. Tasha completely lost her mind. The reality that her free ride was permanently over, that the house she leached off of was gone, shattered her fragile reality. She let out a guttural, piercing scream and lunged across the living room, her hands curled into claws, aiming directly for my face. She wanted to physically tear me apart for exposing her failure and stripping away her unearned comfort. I did not flinch. I did not even raise my arms to defend myself. Before Tasha could cross the coffee table, a massive shadow detached itself from the front hallway. Malik, my head of security, had been standing silently by the front door, observing the entire confrontation. He moved with the terrifying speed and precision of a highly trained military contractor. Malik intercepted Tasha mid-stride. He did not hit her, but he caught her by the shoulders and spun her around using her own momentum against her. He pinned her arms to her sides effortlessly, neutralizing her violent attack in less than 2 seconds. Tasha thrashed and kicked, screaming profanities, but she was completely immobilized against Malik's immovable frame. "Mom, you need to step down," Malik stated, his deep voice vibrating with absolute authority. "Any further physical aggression toward Ms. Kiara will be treated as an immediate threat to her safety and handled accordingly." Darlene shrieked, seeing her golden child restrained. "Get your hands off my daughter," she yelled, stepping forward. Malik shifted his gaze to Darlene, and the sheer intensity of his stare stopped her dead in her tracks. "The property owner has issued a legal directive," Malik said calmly. "Because this individual has just attempted physical violence against the property owner, the 30-day grace period is officially revoked due to safety concerns. You are all trespassing. You will vacate the premises immediately." Malik did not wait for a response. He maintained his grip on Tasha and began marching her forcefully toward the open front door. Darlene scrambled after them, screaming about calling the police and suing for assault. Malik simply carried Tasha out onto the front porch and deposited her onto the dead grass of the front lawn. He turned back into the house, grabbed Jamal by the collar of his ruined linen suit, and dragged him out the same way. Brittany, terrified and weeping, followed right behind them, practically running to escape the house. I stood on the front porch, holding Julian securely against my chest, watching Malik physically remove the toxic waste that had infected my life for decades. Darlene, Tasha, Jamal, and Brittany were all standing on the overgrown lawn, looking like a group of bewildered, terrified trespassers. They were shouting threats and throwing insults, but their voices were suddenly drowned out by a piercing mechanical wail. The sound of multiple police sirens ripped through the quiet suburban neighborhood. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the tinted windows of my parked Maybach. 3 marked police cruisers tore around the corner and screeched to a halt directly in front of the house, blocking Jamal's rental car in the driveway. Terrence stepped out onto the porch, standing right beside me. He watched as 4 uniformed police officers jumped out of their vehicles and marched purposefully onto the lawn. Terrence walked down the wooden steps, meeting the lead officer halfway. He handed the officer the thick printed forensic audit detailing the $1.2 million corporate embezzlement scheme. "That is the man," Terrence said, pointing a steady, unwavering finger directly at his brother. "He stole from my company. The wire transfers, the fake vendor invoices, and the offshore routing numbers are all in that file. He committed grand larceny and federal wire fraud." The police officers did not waste a single second. 2 of them flanked Jamal, grabbing his arms and forcefully spinning him around. They slammed him face first against the hood of a police cruiser, pulling his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoing across the yard was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Jamal was weeping openly now, begging Terrence to call them off, begging for a chance to explain. Terrence simply turned his back on his brother, walking away without saying another word. The ultimate betrayal had been met with ultimate justice. Brittany stood on the curb, her designer trench coat looking utterly pathetic as she watched her wealthy savior get shoved into the back of a police car. She had no money, no car, and her legal husband had just handed her divorce papers. An officer approached her asking for her identification to process her as a person of interest in a federal conspiracy investigation, given that her name was on the offshore accounts. Brittany collapsed onto the curb, sobbing hysterically, realizing that her pursuit of a lavish lifestyle had just bought her a one-way ticket to federal prison. Darlene and Tasha watched the entire scene unfold in absolute horror. The neighborhood had emptied out onto their porches, drawn by the sirens and the screaming. The very people Darlene had spent years trying to impress with her fake superiority were now witnessing her ultimate humiliation. Malik stood firm at the front door, crossing his massive arms over his chest. Because of the attempted assault and the active police presence, the premises are officially secured, Malik announced loudly, ensuring Darlene and Tasha heard every word. You are not permitted to re-enter the property. Darlene looked at me, her face twisted in desperation. Kiara, please, she begged, her pride completely broken. All our things are in there. Where are we supposed to go? I looked down at the woman who had demanded I sleep in a freezing basement and threatened to call Child Protective Services to steal my son. You can buy some garbage bags at the corner store and Malik will hand your clothes out the window. I said, my voice devoid of any pity. I hear the motel down by the highway accepts cash. I suggest you start walking. I turned my back on them and walked into the house, Malik securing the heavy front door firmly behind me. The lock sliding into place signified the absolute end of their reign over my life. The next 3 months moved with the swift, undeniable efficiency of corporate and legal power. I utilized the formidable resources of the Sterling Holdings litigation department to completely dismantle the remaining debris of my past. My legal team took the evidence of the fraudulent notary stamp straight to the county clerk and the title insurance company. Because the sale was executed with a forged signature, facilitated by a convicted felon operating without a license, the transaction was declared legally void ab initio. The deed was ripped from the hands of the buyers, who immediately filed a massive civil lawsuit against Jamal for defrauding them out of their cash. I legally reclaimed my beautiful house in Atlanta, wiping away the contamination of Jamal's betrayal. I stripped the home of the furniture we had shared and redesigned the entire space, bringing back the soft sage green nursery for Julian exactly the way I had envisioned it. In family court, the battle for custody was over before it even began. Armed with the forensic evidence of Jamal's embezzlement, his felony wire fraud conviction, and his documented threats to use the foster care system for extortion, the family court judge did not hesitate. I was granted sole legal and physical custody of Julian. Jamal was stripped of all parental rights, labeled a severe flight risk and a danger to the child's financial and emotional well-being. He would serve out his federal prison sentence knowing he had permanently lost his son. Darlene and Tasha faded into the obscurity they deserved. Locked out of the house they had leached off of, they were forced to move into a cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city. Tasha finally had to get a minimum wage job to survive, and Darlene lost her position at the grocery store when the local authorities began investigating her boyfriend David for his role in the notary fraud. Their social status was completely obliterated, their reputation in the community reduced to a cautionary tale of greed and betrayal. I stand today in the sprawling corner office of Sterling Holdings, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sweeping skyline of the city. The mahogany desk behind me is covered in acquisition reports, development plans, and forensic audits for our new subsidiaries. The corporate empire Elias Sterling built is thriving under my command, expanding into new markets and solidifying its dominance. I hold Julian in my arms, resting my chin gently against his soft, dark hair. He is safe, secure, and surrounded by a fortress of protection that no one will ever breach. I look down at the bustling streets far below, watching the tiny cars and the microscopic people moving through their daily lives. I am no longer the scapegoat of a toxic family. I am no longer the overlooked wife working 80-hour weeks to fund a traitorous husband. I am a millionaire chief executive officer, a fiercely protective mother, and a woman who learned the most valuable lesson in the world the hard way. People will smile in your face while plotting your destruction. They will demand your loyalty while selling you out for a payout. But the ledgers, the transaction logs, and the cold hard numbers never lie. And when you know how to read the math, you hold the power to rewrite your entire destiny. The greatest lesson from this story is that your worth is not determined by the people who mistreat you, even if they are blood relatives. True power comes from silent resilience and financial independence. When a toxic family attempts to break your spirit and steal your peace, you do not have to scream to be heard. Instead, build your own empire in the shadows, protect your assets, and let undeniable success become your loudest revenge. You alone hold the pen to rewrite your destiny. Have you ever had to cut off toxic relatives? Please share below, like, and subscribe today.